La mobilité, c'est quelque chose qui est lié à nos besoins quotidiens.
But it comes at a cost, the cost of increasing greenhouse gas emissions.
The climate crisis is a code red for humanity.
Aujourd'hui, notre modèle urbain est périmé et il y a donc une forte nécessité de changer de paradigme.
On ne peut pas restreindre le besoin de mobilité parce que c'est finalement un besoin de contact.
Il faut qu'on puisse être subversif sur les questions de changement.
On doit permettre aux gens de continuer de se déplacer avec des solutions qui sont adaptées à chaque territoire.
We can transform what is perceived as a huge constraint into a project for society as a whole.
En fait, il vaut mieux qu'on regarde ces problématiques d'une manière multidisciplinaire, en impliquant tous les acteurs et actrices.
L'objectif, c'est d'avoir un think tank qui va parler maintenant des solutions pour s'assurer qu'effectivement, cette transition, elle embarque bien tout le monde.
Thank you. So good afternoon, all. Why, what a challenge. First, I would like to welcome you again and thank you all to participate in this first session of our think tank. Chairing this initiative, it is my duty and my pleasure to say a few words regarding our undertaking, which we all hope is going to be fruitful and insightful. So, I think most of you remember the same thing as I. When I turned 18, my first target was to get my driver license, as maybe most of you. And then after to get some money, to earn some money, to buy my first second-hand car. At that time, it was the beginning of my adult life. It was a symbol of freedom. Because yes, my mobility is an obvious sign of my freedom. But with the ongoing challenges we are facing all together, the energy crisis, the inflation, and more importantly, the climate change, what will be the lifestyle of the next generation? And mobility is essential for development and social life. Everywhere, from the south to the north, from west to the east. How can we make sure this mobility continues to provide this freedom? How can we make sure? Everybody's freedom to move around has had a big cost, highly detrimental to the climate change. So every member of the next generation, no matter who she or he is, no matter where he or she is coming from, he or she deserves that we work on inventing new paths. He or she deserves that we break down our walls, and that we not only stop making the mistakes we've done, but also that we change our way of thinking. We change our way of doing things. We change our way to decide, to make decisions of what we make. In other words, he or she deserves that we think outside of the box and then act. That is why we strongly believe that our think tank on mobility is the right tool for the job. Transdev is a leading company in public transportation, active in 5 continents, with a leading position, thanks to a leading position to our efforts to reinvent mobility, allowing people to move around every day thanks to safe, reliable, and inclusive solutions. By nature, because we transport group of people, the solutions we operate are less impacting than any individual solution, starting, it's obvious, with the car. We have been the front runner for less impacting solution, at the forefront of electrification of fleet buses. I think we're going to reach 3,000 electrical buses at the group level at the end of this year. But choosing Amsterdam for this first event is not a coincidence. You may know that we operate, and I see some Dutch colleagues in the room, we operate a sizely electrical fleet of buses in Netherlands, and very nearby from the city of Amsterdam, by the way. But the wider reality of mobility encapsulates extremely diverse solutions and challenges from the north of Sweden to the south of Portugal, from the inner city of Dublin to the landscape or the countryside of Moravia province in Czech Republic. It is very large. But what all of our activity have in common is what gives them their deepest sense. We don't move vehicles around. We do move people around. It's not the same. That's the sense that what we are doing. And this is the aim of this think tank, the Mobility Sphere, to share, to debate, to propose ideas and solutions, proactively to support changes to the ways we will organize our mobility in the future, every day and everywhere. But it is important to stay close to the daily reality of our territories. That's why we strongly believe that Europe is the right scale for our discussions. Because in Europe, we share the same economic, geographic, political frame. In other words, we all know we have the same destiny. I am convinced that we cannot do it alone. We need all stakeholders, ideas and contributions to move forward. It is key to have a multidisciplinary approach, absolutely key, and work with all the people who want to contribute. Technicians, engineers, decision makers, politicians, but as well sociologists, philosophers, experts on climate change. All those people are welcome to contribute to the debate and share experience and ideas. Our way of life will change, our cities will change, and our society will have to adapt to the new reality. Inflation, the cost of living, and more importantly, the climate change impact are accelerating the trend and are, each in their own way, disrupting the current model. To get the relevant answers, we also need to ask the right questions, including the ones that are extremely uncomfortable. It cannot be no taboo. For example, are we able to question ourselves on the way of life, on our way of life? And can everybody participate to that? Can everybody question his own way of life? But there are many other questions. Do we have the right model of organization in our society, but as well in our political framework, in the public procurement, typically? Do we have the right system to make the change and to move? That's a key question we need to address, etc., etc. So there are plenty more questions, some that you may have in mind, by the way. Some maybe is going to be very broad, some very specific or technical. Every question is relevant from my point of view, every question. So I invite you, all of you, to take a look on the list of questions we already put on the website, Mobility Sphere. There's already some questions. We have the target to get 50 questions for 2050. But if you have more questions, they are welcome again. I want to thank those who already contributed to the questions and ideas. Some of them are here in this room. And I invite, again, everybody to come, see, contribute, and give ideas and questions. Today, we're going to start with a few questions, specifically with the angle of the inclusion and the equity on mobility. And as I said, the questions are much broader than transport solutions alone. Cars, buses, train. We will not only speak regarding technical solutions. They are fundamentally about changing our behavior, the design of our city, the design of our organization. In some ways, it is about how to maintain our freedom with much less impact, and therefore with much more efficiency than we used to have or we still have. So our next task will be to anticipate the impact on cities and mobility of the coming challenges, of the coming changes, but by staying as close as possible to the concrete and daily reality of our life and the concrete and daily reality of the European decision makers. To do so, this think tank is receiving the scientific advice from François Gemenne here. He's member, I say it in French, of the GIEC. I know it's IPCC. Don't ask me the equivalent in English, I don't know, the GIEC. He's professor in many schools, Sciences Po Paris, HEC, I understand. He's also a professor at the University of Liège in Belgium. So I would like to personally, openly and warmly thank him for his constant support and advice to our think tank. After this first session today in Amsterdam, it's my pleasure to already announce to you that we have already decided to organize a second one. It's going to be in Brussels, close to the heart of the European debate in the first quarter of 2024. So you all are welcome to, again, come and join. Because I am convinced that thanks to all your contribution, your ideas, your debate, your experience sharing, we will discover many things. And it will help us collectively to move forward, preserve our mobility, and our freedom. That's what is at stake in this extremely fast-changing world. So I wish you a very inspiring day, and again, thank you for joining us today. François, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for this warm introduction, and welcome to everyone. Welcome to this very first forum of the mobility sphere by Transdev. That is the first forum of, we hope, what will be a very long series taking us to different European cities, each time with the goal of addressing the key challenges for the decarbonization of transport in Europe and beyond. As Antoine said, my name is François Gemenne. I'm happy to serve as the scientific advisor of the mobility sphere. And I have to say that the decarbonization of the transportation sector has always been very close to my heart. I work at the same time on the governance of climate change, but also on the governance of migration and asylum. And therefore, obviously, the issue of the decarbonization of the transportation sector, of mobility at large, is something that is not only very close to my research interests, but also something very close to what I think we need to achieve collectively. And therefore, I also, and I dare say, I also have a kind of very personal interest in the topic. As you all know, transportation accounts for about 21% of greenhouse gas emissions throughout Europe. That is the second largest sector of carbon emissions in Europe, and in many countries, that is even the first sector. That is the case of France, for example, where transportation accounts for 32% of emissions. And yet, when we discuss about climate change, very often we discuss only about energy. And of course, the energy sector is crucially important, and I don't want to minor the importance of the energy sector. But very clearly, if we do not decarbonize the transportation sector, there is absolutely zero chance that we will achieve the objectives of the European Green Deal. There is zero chance that we will achieve the objectives of the Paris Agreement. And therefore, the decarbonization of the transportation sector needs to be a top priority for all of us across Europe. The problem is that demand for mobility keeps increasing. And as such, this is probably a good thing. More mobility means more exchanges, more facilities, and hopefully a more cohesive continent. Yet obviously, the increased demand for mobility comes at a cost, and that is the cost of increasing greenhouse gas emissions. And therefore, if we want to decarbonize this sector, there are really two ways ahead. One would be to restrict mobility. That is an option that would come at a huge cost probably for rights and liberties, and also a huge social cost because of the limitation of exchanges, because of the risk of isolationism, and also because of the inconvenience and impediment that it would represent for the everyday life of European citizens. With a real risk that in that case, transportation would remain a privilege for the wealthy and would become inaccessible for the poorest segment of the population. The other option is, I think, the one we believe in, which is to decarbonize mobility itself, to decarbonize the transport, while making sure that they remain available to all, while making sure that we continue to seize the everyday benefits of mobility, and while making sure also that the decarbonization is equitable to all. We have seen how politically sensitive this could be, especially when it comes about private car transportation. We've seen in many countries protests, riots, and even something that almost looked like a revolt in France with the yellow vest when it was about discussing the decarbonization of car transport. We see a similar move in the UK right now with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak calling the UK a nation of drivers. And obviously, we see also in the Netherlands with the BBB topping the opinion polls ahead of the upcoming elections, we see that the issue of equity in the decarbonization should be a key priority. And if we don't make this a key priority, then there is a risk of political backlash. And this is one of the important topics that we will be addressing this afternoon. The reason why the mobility sphere exists as a think tank is really to gather a wide range of actors across Europe and beyond to discuss these issues together and to try and see how we can concretely suggest and implement practical measures that will make a difference across the continent. This is the reason why, even though the mobility sphere was launched by Transdev, a private company, it also gathers a wide range of public actors, municipalities, elected politicians, other industries, NGOs, and also the users of everyday mobility. And I think this is by bringing together a wide range of stakeholders at the same table that we will be able to achieve together these different objectives. And I'm aware that these objectives can sometimes appear as contradictory to each other. And sometimes these objectives will appear like trying to put a square into a circle. And therefore, we shouldn't hide the difficulties ahead, but I'm also convinced that this is by discussing these difficulties and obstacles together that we will manage to find practical ways forward that are badly needed today in Europe. This is the reason why we have convened this very first forum in Amsterdam today. We've gathered speakers in the roundtables from different corners of Europe. This is as Antoine said, the first of what we hope will be a long series of different forums. In the future, we plan to hold 2 forums every year, the next one being in Brussels in the spring. We also hope to complement these forums with a series of workshops that will address more specific themes, sometimes with more technical issues, and these workshops in turn can inform and feed into the forums. We also hope that these forums will gain in visibility. So please do not hesitate to take pictures, to share insights from the roundtable, because what we want is really to try and convene as many people as possible to the table. And although, obviously, we cannot bring everyone to every city across the continent, we are live streaming this opening, so hopefully people can also watch us on LinkedIn, and I want to say hello to all those of you watching on LinkedIn right now. Today, we shall address 2 crucial issues. The first one in the first roundtable is how to make decarbonized mobility desirable. In particular, how to make public transportation desirable. One of the key reasons why people remain so attached to their car, for example, is very often because they don't find public transport desirable. And therefore, we'll try and see in different countries and regions of Europe, what are the key policies, the key transformations that need to happen to make public transportation more desirable than it is today. In the second roundtable, we'll address the issue of inclusivity. How can we make sure that decarbonized transport is as inclusive as possible? As I said, the risk at the moment being that there is some kind of social divide around this issue of decarbonization, and sometimes the impression that the poor bear most of the burden of the decarbonization of transport, whereas the wealthy pretty much continue their use of transport as if nothing had changed. After these 2 roundtables, we will hear 2 keynote speeches, one by Elke van den Brandt, who's the regional minister for transportation in Brussels, the other one by Samah Karaki, who's a neuroscientist, and she will address the changes in the mindset that need to happen to decarbonize transportation. So without further ado, I think we can now open officially this first forum, and I will call upon the stage Karima Delli, Katarína Cséfalvayová, and Zaina Nazar for this first roundtable. So, as I said, this roundtable will try and see how we can make decarbonized mobility as desirable as possible. How can we attract more people to public transportation? And for this, we've convened Karima Delli. Karima, you're a member of the European Parliament for the Greens. You're also the chair of the important Committee on Transport and Tourism in the Parliament. Katarína, you're the director of the Institute for Central Europe. You're also the executive lead of the Danube Tech Valley Initiative. And you're also a former member of Parliament and the former chairwoman of the Committee on International Relations within the Slovakian Parliament. And Zaina, you're the co-founder of the Cities Forum, and you're coming straight from London. And in order to ensure some gender balance in this panel, I shall be moderating the panel. The man is just there to moderate the panel. I mean, you'll do. The moderator is just a secondary role. Yeah, exactly. And I think I will start by asking each of you a very first question, which can be an opening statement as well to kickstart the discussion. In your view, we realize that decarbonized mobility is an imperative. How can we make it desirable? And at the moment, this is clearly a key obstacle that we're facing. Karima, would you like to start?
Yes, of course. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for your presentation, François. Really, it's a pleasure to be with us today. It's a crucial question, really, but when we often wonder how people will accept decarbonization, which is always presented as a constraint. And we have a problem with this. And they have the impression that this will be a punishment. So the challenge is to show that this ecological transition in transport, and you say which is one of the important sector emitting the CO2 emission, is a solution to the numerous problems. Really, for example, the cost of living, really, the pollution, health, but also traffic jam. In Paris, we understand what is a traffic jam, and therefore waste time. So the real question is how we make people want to act. It's a real question. That is to say, for me, is acting for the climate, and decarbonization is in their interest. And if politicians can understand this, really, it will be very great, because the challenge is to make people want to take alternative. And alternative for me, we have this alternative. Public transport, cycling, carpooling, I hope tomorrow more trucks on train and not on the road, more train, and especially for me, night train, because I love night train. But we must facilitate it for them and make this alternative more accessible. Accessible, that is to say, for me, the national and the European level provide the broad framework, yes, but we have a clear mission is to help the local level. That's the reason why I prefer not to speak about desire, but for me, acceptability, acceptable mobility is not just a desire. If you have a choice, you prefer to go to last 1 hour in your car or to have a public transport. People say, I prefer public transport, of course, but is it time to say now, really, what does it mean, this ecological transition? And for me, the ecological transition means that we'll have, yes, to make more effort, but we need to follow the poor people is a necessity, but not only poor people. Because at this moment, I'm so sorry, but I receive in my beautiful office in Brussels a lot of company, and the company say me, is very hard, this transition, because more cost, more changes, yes, but I'm so sorry. With the climate change, we don't have any choice, because the impact in the future, I believe, it will be very, very hard. So is now to act. So the European legislation is not just a game. I'm so sorry. Sometimes people say, companies say, it's not respectable, it's not realistic, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but it's not mine. I'm so sorry. That's the reason why for me, and is my last words, we have at this moment a good opportunity to change the narrative. For me, political, when talk about mobility, each time is a negative narrative. Now it's time to change to positive narrative. If you win, we win. And if the company win, the people win, but the planet win, and the future win. Thank you.
Thank you, Karima. Katarína, I've been quite many times to Bratislava, and there is one place in Bratislava that you don't want me to see, and that's the train station.
Absolutely. Thank you, first of all, for having me. It is quite rare still to have a Central European perspective invited to a Western European forum, if I might call it this way. So I appreciate it a lot, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, François. Indeed, yes, transportation and public transportation is a big problem in Central Europe. And in Bratislava, as François rightly pointed out, I've always avoided, when having him over in Bratislava, for him to see the main railway station, because it looks, well, not very inviting, and it's not the safest place in the city. But let me perhaps, before speaking of what we could do, lay out the challenges or how the situation looks like in Central Europe, because whereas we have certainly many similarities between Central, Eastern and Western Europe in terms of transport, there are some specificities and some problems that we are struggling with in particular. So in the Central and Eastern European region, transportation sector is something very strong, very highly valued, and it has had a very strong position as a sector of economy. During the communist times, it has been a lifeline of the economy together with manufacturing and energy, and this has also somehow been translated after the change of the regime, after the passage to market economies, and after our accession into the EU, where many of the Western companies, car-making, car producers, for instance, have relocated their manufacturing facilities to Central and Eastern European countries, making, for instance, Slovakia, my own home country, the biggest producer of cars per capita in the world. So transportation is a very, very strong sector. And it's, of course, as well, a very significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. As François said, this is very similar in Central Europe than in the rest of the continent. Transportation is the second biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. But perhaps a small difference, this is the sector where the growth in greenhouse gas emissions has been the quickest, the fastest since 1990. So whereas other countries are slowly reaching their peak or their cap in emissions and slowly managing to drive it down, it's not the case in Central and Eastern European countries. And so now about decarbonization, and let me present you some of the challenges that we face in decarbonization that perhaps do not come as very logical ones, but those are very, very important factors. Speaking, for instance, about the railway station in Bratislava or others, there is a big problem with public investment in transportation sector and in infrastructure projects as such. Why is that? Because, as you know, this region has been infamous for corruption, which has been one of the cases that the public investment hasn't been so effective, let's say, in the past. And now it has, the sheet has turned a little bit. The situation has improved significantly, I would say. But we have, as Hungarians say, we have fallen at the other side of the horse. And the problem now is that we have policies and administrative bureaucratic procedures, so many of them, and so thoroughly in place in order to avoid corruption, that this is something that has become very, very ineffective, and it is a factor that has significantly refrained us from fully using, for instance, the European funds, where most of the Central or all of the Central and Eastern European countries, I'm sorry, have been net beneficiaries from the EU funds. We are facing this problem with the Recovery and Resilience Plan of the EU, that we will not be able to use the money just because we have put too much of a strain on ourselves, too many bureaucratic obstacles, I would call it. So this is one significant factor that tends to be overlooked, but this is something very important, and this is something that needs to be solved in order to have some significant transportation and infrastructure investments. And this is obviously also why private companies tend to be reluctant in joining tenders and do not have the best experience in these public investments and public-private partnership projects in the region. Then there is a second, perhaps somewhat surprising factor, but a very significant one as well, and that is the reluctance of people to leave their cars and to exchange them for some more sustainable means of transportation or greener means of transportation. And this is pretty much true in most of the EU, perhaps with the exception of really big cities like Paris, where it's more effective and quicker to commute by public transport than to use your own car. But in cities such as Vienna or Prague or Budapest, Bratislava or Warsaw, you can use your car quite easily, but it's not just the comfort. I've mentioned Vienna, but this does not come into what I'm about to say. The problem is that being ex-communist countries and having this past has left a very specific kind of burden or trait on the inhabitants of the region, and that is that the car for them is a question of status. And they would never give it up. They would rather live on bread rolls, literally, during the whole month or the whole year or several years. They need a car to show their status. And there was one of my fellow members of parliament, when I was in parliament, who had said that she would never look at a man or talk to a man who doesn't own a car, who takes a public transportation to work. So this is just to illustrate how important it is, and the bigger car, the more luxurious car, and heavier car in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the better, sadly. So these are perhaps the significant challenges, and there are a few others, but I feel that I've been talking for too long, so I will pass the floor back to François.
You certainly have not, but there will be more time later on. Zena, your turn. What do you think is, from your perspective of the Cities Forum, especially in cities, then what do you think is the main obstacle to public transport being desirable?
Hello. Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you, Transdev, the Mobility Sphere, for inviting me here. Pascal, Julia, Angèle, everyone, Antoine, François. I've met so many people. I feel like I'm part of the family. Thank you so much for inviting me for this very important event. I'm very pleased to be here. So, what was your question?
Especially in cities, and from your perspective at the Cities Forum, what are the key obstacles to the desirability of public transport and of decarbonized transport at large?
Okay, let's see. Oh, I sound horrible. So what I want to say that Karima and Katarína didn't probably mention a lot is what my message was. I just came from Baku in Azerbaijan, and there was the World Habitat Day, as you know, and where decarbonization is very important. And my message there was there should be no free road. So this is basically my logo. I may have some enemies for saying that, but it is about time that we stop the car, that we enforce I know that in the UK you have mixed messages about that, but this is my clear message. There should be no free cars, no free roads. Free cars, there are no free cars, but there should be no free road. And there must be a way to kind of enforce people using their own car, because they are causing damage to the world, to the earth, to the roads. And basically the idea is, yes, in our world, this part of the world, there are alternatives, there are options. So I guess that you have no excuse. I'm British, but originally from Lebanon, and we kind of have an excuse because we don't have the option not to drive a car. Although we could cycle, we could walk, but again, it's about culture, it's about habit, and we need to find a way, whether by enforcement, whether by public acceptability. I know we have two beautiful ladies from the kind of political side. I'm an engineer, I'm a consultant, I'm not political, but I can say that there must be a way to kind of promote active travel, promote basically public transport if it's existing. If it doesn't exist, find a way to make it there, because it is more important than investing in anything else. And then I was asked earlier about why do you focus on cities? That's because 70% of the population live in cities. So it's important that we kind of focus on cities, but then not to forget the other part, the less basically developed or smaller cities, because also it can affect the economy for them to be able to get to their point of destination, whether it's work or basically school or anything. But we need to have an inclusive, happy travel mode solutions, and we can do it. We're still able to do it today. We may not be able to do it later. And I don't know why all day today I wanted to relay this message. I don't know if it's related, but in basically large cities or first world or developed cities where we are today, especially Amsterdam is the best choice of places where you could have this event. I thought about the world here as like an open buffet. And then somehow we were taught that in ethics, you should leave food in your plate. I don't know, what kind of ethics is that, but typically you should leave food in your plate because it's not nice to show that it's empty plate. But I think that it should be the opposite. Ethics should be to empty your plate, which means just only take what you need from the open buffet, even if it's available today, whether it's water, whatever it is. Today is available, but then if you only take what you need and not basically waste or take more than what you need, first you get sick, you get fat, and then and then basically you're taking away from other people. So think of the world like this, and this could be maybe a way to help with the decarbonization. Is take only what you need, be kind, and don't just overspend or just waste, because that's not helpful for anyone, especially for our health, well-being, and for everyone else.
Thank you. I'd like to challenge you immediately on the first point you made, that there should be no free roads. I understand the point, but I think that we're all aware that if we had only paved roads across Europe, then most likely this would induce some kind of political backlash, because people living outside of the inner core of the cities would probably complain that they have to bear the cost of decarbonization, while wealthier people who can afford houses and apartments in the inner core of the cities, well, would no longer need a car. This is a typical case of what's happening in France. I mean, most people living in central Paris do not own a car because the car is more a burden than anything else. But people who live in the suburbs outside of Paris badly need their car to go to work, to see their relatives. And how can we balance, I would say, the social consequences of that?
The thing is, you are really paying, whether it's paid through toll road or whether I don't know how you are still paying. It's just maybe you don't see it when you pay for your time, for the delay, for the extra gas to get to because it takes longer, the stress of basically delay. So one thing could be when there is transparency within the government, when this money is spent basically on alternative solutions. I can give you a very good example in Stockholm, where they had many years ago the Stockholm congestion charging. So what they've done, and they've done like a public toll before the public poll, before they started the congestion charging, and they had over 50% against it. And 6 months later, when they've done the trial, and people could see the value, cleaner air, because less cars, less basically fuel, less waiting time. They saw that this had been spent on public transport and alternative transport modes. Then you had over 50% supporting it. So this is just one example of where you see the value of that. I would say that, yes, there are exceptions. There might be some people who are being, I would say it's unfair to them, but I wouldn't say that would be maybe overall 10% of the people basically being harmed from this decision. But the majority would be basically, it would be better for the city when you charge people. And the idea is when you sell it properly, when you do proper public acceptability and explain, but I would say trust in the government and transparency from the government side is very, very important. So for any politician who wants to run for a politician, I mean, yes, of course, they need to think about how they can become popular, but then more important than being popular is to see what's best for their city. And I'm a true believer that congestion charging is the best solution. So I'm sorry, we can talk all day, but I would say that this is the way to move forward, especially in places where there are alternatives. Again, I mean, if there are no alternatives, we need to rethink about it, maybe. But then, again, every city is different. So I would say that the congestion charging or any kind of way to charge to use the road, whether it's parking, whatever it is, as long as basically it's done in a way, in a solution that fits the needs of the city, then it should be working.
Karima, I'm afraid you're the politician in the room.
Nobody is perfect.
How do you feel about congestion charging and more broadly about the issue of price? I guess there is also a big issue regarding the price and the affordability of public transport.
First of all, thank you for your speech, because in France we have this debate about access restriction zone. It's the same thing. And I believe it's a more complicated topic that it seems, really. As a Green, I need to support this, really, because we talk about, for me, it's a positive aspect on air quality, but we should make sure that the proper social safeguards in the place. What we can do with the poor people, first of all. People cannot afford to live in the city center and should not to be penalized tomorrow. And for me, that's the reason why I'm totally agree with you. We need to support the alternative. And one of the key of this alternative is public transport. And I have a problem with my, you can make a Twitter now, okay? I have a problem in my transport committee and the civil government, because public transport is not a priority. It's not a priority. I'm the first woman on the head of this my committee, the first woman, and when I talk about public transport, about cycling, etc., all men, very conservative in my committee, say, it's not a good time. It's not a good time. And I believe is a priority. Why I say that? Because for me, public transport is a backbone of our mobility, really. I was born in the north of France, a very poor city, and for us public transport is a common good. It's only means for poor people that cannot afford a car to move. We need public transport, but the problem is this. All politicians don't want to say the necessity of this public transport. Okay, the climate change, yes, but not only. And one of my, thank you Transdev for one thing is very important in the north of France, when in Dunkirk. Dunkirk is a city with a very important history, with the poor people, like Tallinn and Dunkirk. Now is a free transport. People say it's not necessary to take my car. Why? I prefer to take public transport, first of all. And the second, very important for me, issue is the link. Public transport is a social link. For example, in Dunkirk, poor people is a common good that they will not be careful if you do something in the bus. It's our interest. So that the reason why, for me, we have this alternative. And my second very important thing is we need to say what will be the city tomorrow. Each summer, the mayors, the members say, look at this, is climate change. And what can I do now? And the problem is we have two speeches. The speech of good practices from the mayors and the member states. Each member state now is crazy because we have this Green Deal, but the member states don't want to respect the target of the Green Deal. So we have, but the city respects the Green Deal. Some city in Europe is crazy, but it's a good way to go to the Green Deal. And now we have a gap with member states and several cities, and we have a gap with what can the mobility actors do and the speech of politicians. So your question, are you a politician? I can say yes and no. Yes, because I'm the head of this transport committee, but no, because I push. It's very hard, really. But no, because normally each politician needs to respect the Paris Agreement, for example. It's not only the blah, 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 but in reality, what can I do? That's the reason why I finished, François, because you talk about the investment. It's crazy because all people say after the COVID, the life of the people, the life of the people can change. Do you remember? Yes. But the problem is the investment in Europe. We have a lot of investment in aviation for the car, but where in public transport? Where cycling? Where is the budget for night train? I'm so sorry. I come back with this. But it's crazy. That's the reason why when you talk about mobility is a time to rethink what is the mobility. And the mobility, we cannot talk about mobility without budget. It's a key of the future. We cannot do what you want if we don't have any budget. That's the reason why we are responsible about the choice of investment. And investment tomorrow is not, I'm so sorry, the road. It's not individual car, because this car, 90% on the road, don't move. It's a time to share, really. So it's just, we need in Europe just a little courage and good choice. and priority. That's all.
Thank you, Karima. Katarína, what would a congestion charge change in the dating scene in Bratislava? Or in other words, what would it take for a young man in Bratislava to take out a woman on a date in a bus or in a taxi rather than in a car? How can this change over time, and what would it take? Perhaps there's something to do with the taxi, because you have the weirdest taxi system in the world in Bratislava.
We do. And the taxi is cheap, relatively. Well, that's a very good question. And as a former politician myself, I've spent quite a lot of time reflecting on that. But the problem, and again, I will talk about the region and the regional specificity, is that somehow there's no political will because there is no demand. And we have fallen somewhere in between where normally on the European scene, it's the Greens and the Social Democrats that promote green policies. In our region, the Greens in many of the countries are inexistent. There is no such thing as a Green Party, for instance, in Slovakia. This is something that has been relatively wiped out. There's no such thing as social democracy in Hungary or in Poland, in some of the countries. In the other countries, social democracy focuses on the so-called bread and butter topics, like comparing the wages and the prices of goods in the West and in the East and Central Europe, and not talking about problems like migration or like the green transition at all, if we're lucky, because if we're not, they are talking about it, but taking the far-right rhetoric, the left-wing politicians or the social democratic politicians. So politically, this is something I think that needs to change, and it needs to change because of the demand. Currently, there are, of course, a few political parties across the region that are doing a good job in terms of promoting the green topics and talking about green transition and providing very specific programs. We have just seen it in the elections in Slovakia last Saturday. But there was still a majority of the parties who were campaigning against the end of combustion engine cars, because we don't want that, we need to protest that, and Central and Eastern Europe needs to take lead on that, and we just cannot afford that. And this is what they are bringing to the elections. And the problem a little bit is that the parties and the politicians who are in favor and who are trying to promote green solutions are doing it in a way that looks more like activism. And people they have this image of these young men with long hair and wrinkled linen shirts that are standing out in the streets, encouraging kids not to go to schools on Friday. And this is something where a relatively conservative populations and societies, and this is something that is frowned upon. And the problem is that perhaps the political majority, the more conservative parties, have not taken these solutions, or not all of them, and not the majority, not enough of them. Have they taken them for their own? And also, when we're speaking about the European Green Deal, François and I just submitted a Horizon project application this last week, talking about how companies in Central and Eastern Europe, but perhaps also in the western part of Europe, have been somehow left out of the discussion about the European Green Deal, or this is at least how they feel. And they are against it. They are unable to perceive it as an opportunity, but they are perceiving it as a threat. And it is vital that we change this paradigm and that we do this, we make this political change, which is only doable by having customers for it, for these types of politics, and by changing the mindsets also of people. So it is extremely important, in my opinion, to work with companies and firms, and that's why I'm really happy to see Transdev engaging in this mobility sphere forum and talking about sustainable mobility. And this is something that I'm persuaded we need to bring also to Central and Eastern Europe, not only companies as big economic players, but also as big employers, and the employees do often take their views based on what they see in their work when they are afraid that the cars that they are manufacturing will no longer be produced in 10 or 15 years, then of course they will be also in their personal views and in their votes against the green transition and against green solutions.
Thank you very much. And I agree, it is absolutely crucially important that we take into account the view from Central and in Eastern European countries, especially in that forum. And very often when it comes to green and climate policies, we've had a very Western view of things. And therefore, I think this is really something that this forum should look into and should take into account. It is now time for questions and answers. So please, if you have a question, please kindly introduce yourself before you ask the question. Try to phrase it as a question rather than as a comment, and I know this can be a difficulty sometimes, and perhaps also specify whether your question is intended to the panel as a whole or to a specific member of the panel. Do we have? Yes, we have, oh, someone over there. Stand up. All right.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
My name is Flora. I came from Station F in Paris, Programme Ville de Demain, the city of tomorrow. I'm with the founder of the association, and we have a question for you, Madame. Let me just 1 second, please. We would love to know, how do you identify or process the selection of impactful, innovative solutions, and how do you switch from proof of concept to industrialization on the solution? Many thanks for your answers.
Thank you. And the question is addressed to whom?
Everybody.
To everyone, all right. Do we have another question? Or shall we proceed immediately? Then I guess we can proceed immediately. Karima, would you like to start? So the question was, how do you move from the idea, the proof of concept, into the implementation, and how do you make the selection between ideas that will come to being a real thing?
I'm happy to start.
Please do start.
So, but I really can't. I can't help but answer or comment on your question to Katarína about dating and what do you do to impress a girl? Do you drive a car or take her by bus? You live in a 15-minute city that was made in Paris. So if you're in a 15-minute city concept, then you just walk or you cycle or you don't need to drive. So that answers your question. So same thing with the question of from the audience. I would say the 15-minute city concept is quite amazing and it's possible. So it's not just an idea. It is basically being implemented. So it's the answer is start with your neighborhood, start with communities, and basically start by cleaning your own road in front of you, by just doing things within your neighborhood, starting to kind of as citizens enforce when you see something wrong. Tell the council that this is wrong, that is not good for the environment. So we start by ourselves before we start complaining about the government. And then we can complain after we've done our job.
But if I may, on the 15-minute city, and for those of you in the room who are not familiar with the concept, that's the idea that in a city, organized as a 15-minute city, all the facilities you need on an everyday basis, the shops, the restaurants, doctors, the schools, should be available within 15 minutes of walk from your home. And it's interesting to see that this concept in the UK has been played up by conspirationists, and that there has been some kind of conspiracy theories that pretended that basically the concept was that people would be forbidden to walk beyond 15 minutes outside of their home, and that they would be in a kind of 15-minute prison. And I think it's interesting to see, and of course that was a crazy conspiracy theories that had nothing to do with reality, but it is interesting to see how that simple basic concept was perceived by some as a potential threat to their freedom and civil rights and liberties.
I think people thinking this way are hopeless. So, I mean, a hopeless case for me. So, I mean, I wouldn't bother or like waste time on people thinking this way. But what I can say to you is I probably have been around the world, literally around the world. And I have to say, there is no ideal city. So with the 15-minute city, yes, there are some risk of kind of separating people. But the idea is bigger than that. I mean, yes, but then we need to make the effort not to let this happen. The more important thing is to help with reducing driving your car, to help with helping people, because it can help people with disabilities. So every solution, every idea has advantages and disadvantages. But I would say 15-minute city has more advantages than disadvantages. So, and I would ignore people who try to find only, I mean, these people who are making those comments, if they have a better solution, we're always open for other solutions. But if you don't have solutions, you just want to criticize some ideas or some implementations, then it's not really helping anyone.
Thank you. Karima, maybe also on the question about the selection of ideas, there are lots of bright ideas being circulated around. How can we select those that will actually make it to the proof of concept and then to reality?
First of all, in Europe, we have a lot of programs who select a lot of projects. One of the programs very important is Horizon 2020. And this program is very important because we have a key with the relation with the industry. My problem with this is also often we have a focus with the research. It's not concrete program, go to the market. That's the reason why I'm here. Because I decided in my committee to create 5 years ago a special prize. The name is European Startup Prize for Mobility. We have this prize is a new concept in Europe. It's supported by European Bank, by the European Commission, and a lot of partners. At this moment, no Transdev, I'm so sorry. But a lot of Dutch Bahn, RATP, blah, blah, blah. And we receive 800 projects on mobility. And we select only 10 because we are very hard. And this 10 startups, for example, because your enterprise is in a Station F, yes, that's the reason. For the next selection, send me your project, please. And 10 startups, we make a European tour, and we follow each startups with a special and each very important tech event in Europe, and we make the link between, for example, with the city, with, for example, a new target, etc. And during 1 year, 10 startups is a new philosophy in Europe, first of all. I say another thing just for you is a scoop. After your event, I go to Madrid because it's the first time I sign a declaration for the cycling in Europe. And it is industry because it's the first time I'm very proud because the European Parliament in February has adopted a first European strategy industry on bicycle. And tomorrow, with the Commission, with the Council and the Parliament, we sign a very clear objective. In 5 years, all the bicycle in Europe made in Europe. Made in Europe. That is to say, we have a link with this industry, and we have the link with this decarbonization. And the last, but not the least, I'm so sorry for you, because normally in Europe you have 1-2 minutes in the hemicycle, but here I can do what I want.
We have plenty of time here.
But I believe we need a debate at this moment to the CO2 of the bus, and it's not only the CO2, it's a new industry. That's the reason why I can understand sometimes actors say it's not possible because we need more time. I can understand. But we need to push, because tomorrow we can do European industry in the bus. If we do nothing, I'm so sorry, it will be China industry. We have the same debate in car industry. I was very angry. I'm so sorry, I'm a member of European Parliament during 14 years. So when I arrive in this parliament, I say, it's a time to change this automotive industry. And now we have a problem with this electric car. Because it's not, I'm so sorry, it's not a European industry, it's a China industry. That's the reason why we cannot the same mistake with the bus, for example.
And Karima, do you think we can fix the thing with the car industry? I mean, we know that the European car makers tend to be rather reluctant with electrical cars. And is there a way to shift that around, or do you think it's hopeless?
At this moment, we have a very big debate with several member states because it's very hard. Who can pay an electric car today? We have a big problem with this car, really. But I say, for me, it's not electric car the big challenge. The big challenge is not necessary tomorrow the individual car. Electric or not is not my, yes, it's my problem. But the first step is who can change the mobility. And tomorrow we cannot push the individual car. And in the European Parliament, I'm so sorry, because the Conservative, we have several groups, they don't want any problems with the car industry. That's the reason why. When you have in the head of transport committee, a woman and Greens, is a fight. I'm so sorry. Because, yes, because we need the vision, short term and long term. And I believe long term now, because if we make only we have only a short-term vision, very short. Tomorrow, we can cry because we don't have any alternative. That's the reason why. Okay, we need at this moment to push electric car. Okay, we need the time. Yes, but we need a new market. So a new industrial politics in Europe is now.
Thank you. Do we have another question in the room? Yes, there is one here, then one there. Oh, you have the mic, so you start. We'll take the 3 questions in a row, right? 1, 2, and 3.
I come back. The declaration is a Séville. I say Barcelone, je crois. Ou Madrid. J'ai dit Madrid, pardon.
You said Madrid, yeah.
So, Laurent Mazy, Head of Public Affairs, Transdev Group. A question for Karima about the digitalization of public transport. If you imagine in the coming years the competition between cars and public transport with the ongoing electromobility, in fact, a car will remain desirable and decarbonized mode. So don't you imagine in the coming years a tool, a digital tool, like in the Netherlands, a unique, a single pass, which allow you to use all the modes in Europe, in all the member states. It's not the unique fare, Karima. Huh? It's not the same. A single pass.
Thank you. So the issue of a single pass that would allow you to use any means of transportation. Second question.
Hello, everybody. I'm Frederic, co-founder of Decarbonized. I guess my question will be complementary to yours. Why don't we add a carbon budget to this European pass?
All right. We have one at the back, and then we'll come on the left.
More. Hi, my name's Kim Watts. I'm from the Coalition for Reimagined Mobility. We're a transatlantic think tank, and we benefit very much from having Transdev on our board. It's a pleasure to be here. My questions are actually surprisingly very complementary to the last two people. Thinking about this, making public transportation more desirable, more acceptable, and recognizing the cultural differences. I work transatlantically. Some of the differences seen in Central and Eastern Europe are very similar to those that we see in the United States with acceptability. How about that we accept that there is no one silver bullet, but the reality is what we have to achieve is decarbonization and greater equity. So we allow different speeds of what desirable transportation, desirable mobility means. And indeed, perhaps that means one pass throughout Europe. There's a budgetary, there's an economic element in that. Can we accept that and realize that there is actually not one solution, because we have to bring the entire public along who increasingly feel disenchanted with Green Deal policies. But in the long run, we're all dead if we don't do something about this.
Thank you.
What a happy note to end on.
And we'll take the fourth and last question for this round from the gentleman with the tie. What?
Thank you very much. Sylvain, I'm Director of Strategy at UITP, the Global Association for Public Transport. I have a little bit of a more general question, because you're painting a pretty gloomy picture, and unfortunately I agree with it. So we're lacking investment, we're struggling to have the recognition of public transport. We have a narrative, populist narrative, which is emerging, and I'm afraid we're only at the beginning, which is very challenging to respond to, and I would not ignore it. But that's at the national level, that's international level. We have cities from Bogota to Amsterdam to Prague, which are doing very interesting things, where mobility is evolving in the right direction, the use of urban space. There is modal shift progressively. COVID slowed things down, but we're coming back, especially in Europe, in many places, except maybe the US. So the question, the more general question is, how can we capitalize on what's moving forward in the right direction at the local level to try to get over the obstruction we find at the national level? It's almost a philosophical question, or at least a political one in terms of governance. But there is something happening, and we have the threat that it's going to be killed by a different political framework.
Thank you. So we have a batch of questions on a pass, a European pass that will allow to use different means of transportation, a potential carbon budget associated with it, the potentiality of having diverse solutions, recognizing there is no silver bullet, but also, on the one, how can we basically capitalize on what is going in the right direction, on the positive moves and headway that have been achieved in the past few years? Who'd like to start?
I'm happy to start because I'm always short and I'm not as eloquent as Karima and Katarína, but I try to get to the point. So I think if you look out from the window here somewhere around this building, there is a question that really struck my attention. Are we going in the right direction? I don't know if you've seen it from the window, but and I was thinking about it, and I believe that we are in a way going in the right direction, because we have no choice not to do that. No, we have no option not to do that. So to answer the questions of the audience, yes, there must be some way to move around basically in Europe, because it's an open country, and I say that with broken heart because I come from London, and hopefully, some things will, I'm still dreaming of the day when this decision is undone, but there's nothing I can do about it. So yes, you should definitely benefit. You should also learn from others. In Luxembourg, they started the free public transport. So I don't know how they financed it, but it's very smart because it does basically. I lived in Luxembourg, and basically it's perfect that they have this option of free public transport. There must be, as much as there must be kind of a pool for decarbonization or to pay to carbon, the decarbon idea. Yeah, I love your idea. There must be also a way to, same thing with Bogota. I've been to Bogota, it's a fantastic place as well. So there is a way, we're all global here. I mean, I can bet you at least every person in this room has been to at least 5 or 10 countries in their lives. And there is a room to learn from each other. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to learn from each other. And as much as it's great to be here and to have the public transport as history within Europe. In Dubai, for example, I can give a quick example about Dubai. They have started the Dubai Toll Road, or SALIC, and I guess they've done it the other way around, but then they provided metro 2 years later, which is fine because they didn't have it before. But then when people saw the value of using public transport or the metro, they've done it. And they've done it in a very smart way to accommodate the needs and the culture. So they've done basically the gold pass and the family side. And so they've done it in a way to cater the needs, to understand, to respect the culture. So this is very important. So, I mean, if I want to say kind of summarize what I say in 2 words. All cities have same needs, but every city is unique. So as long as you understand the needs of every city, then you have done your job. And to answer the question that I've seen by the window, are we going in the right direction? I really hope we are.
Thank you. Karima?
Laurent. Just for you, the commission is supposed to publish a proposal in November, and the name of this legislation is on multimodal ticketing. November. Well, the rule of this legislation is very clear: is to facilitate the experience of people that are buying tickets and going across several countries for diverse transport services provider is a very important key of this legislation. So we push to have an agreement before February, because after February we cannot any agreement because we have a next election. So we push this text. It's an important field for us, the Greens. Normally the rapporteur will be a Greens, so it's a good idea. And the last but not the least, because I have just a little problem, but I would like to open this debate with you. Because I'm totally agree with you. With the carbon, it will be great to have a pass, special, but with the carbon, okay, great, but it's the price. At this moment in Europe, all member states can open the debate. For example, in France, we talk about pass rail. In Germany, we talk about climate, like the climate tickets, etc. In Austria, in Spain, and in Portugal too, maybe, yes. That's the reason why, for me, we need to have the debate. We can not agree. I'm so sorry. It's Europe. But we need to try a compromise. Why I say that? Because in France, I push this climate ticket. For me, it's very important, really. Because it's incredible to say the train and public transport together can make a new mobility tomorrow with just a pass. It will be very great. That's the reason why I don't want to close the door to this debate. Please invite me another time, because I believe it's a very big debate. But just for information, yes, we can receive normally this text in November, and I can make this new criteria about carbon, it will be great. I can understand. I cannot support, but now we need to convince a lot the other political group. So good luck.
Thank you. Katarína, the last word is for you.
Thank you so much. If I may, I would start with the first question because I didn't get a chance to respond to that. And it was a question that I liked in particular about innovation and technological startups. And let me tell you, in the Danube region or in the Central and Eastern European region, there's I agree, I painted quite a gloomy picture. If there is hope in something, it is startups and innovation. We at the Danube Tech Valley Initiative have put together a database or a platform with the Amsterdam-based startup called Dealroom that gathers all the data on startups and innovation. And we did what we call the Danube Innovation Tracker. So we track innovation and startups and all the innovation ecosystems throughout the Danube region, from the source of the Danube in Germany all the way down to the Black Sea, covering 14 countries. And just before coming here, I checked very quickly, and what I found is that 10% of all the startups based in the Danube region are active, or their ideas and their products are about making transportation greener. So this is something, this one thing that gives us hope for the future. And also in the context of, again, Central and Eastern European countries lagging behind in terms of innovation, and there being lots of programs of support of innovation, whether it is on European level, such as Horizon, but also EIT and others, but also on national and local level, these startups get really a chance to go very quickly from proof of concept through different types of support, funding schemes, and so on to really prove that they can be viable on the market. And it is what is happening. And as I said, 10% of all the startups in all the sectors, not only transportation, are active in greening the transport sector. As for the European pass, one single European pass, possibly with a carbon budget, I think that's a great idea, and I'm completely in favor. But one thing that I would like to point out, and that has been said by the gentleman in the tie, is that we have to be careful about the debate. There is some populist backlash already. We can feel it very much in our region. And it's not just the problem of there being populism itself, but this is a problem of very, very concentrated efforts of non-European actors. In our case, it's Russia. I could talk for hours about how Russian actors are very active on the disinformation scene in Slovakia. Slovakia is the most hit, by the way. Then there's Serbia, Bulgaria, and the other countries. But Slovakia is very, very hardly hit. And you'd be surprised on the public opinions of people, whether they would choose Russia or the United States or Europe. And the green policies, I'm afraid, are becoming, we can already see it, the next migration issue. As we had a dispute and a cleavage between the east and western part of the EU in migration, the next topic that risks to become perhaps not as pronounced, but perhaps yes, is the Green Deal, the green transition, sustainability, and these topics. So we need to be very careful at the same time as adopting all these new measures, to be very careful and to listen to one another in terms of the public debate and the framing of how we put things and how we explain it, and to really make sure to have everyone on board so that no groups of citizens are feeling that they have been left out, because this could lead to a big problem in the EU that would cause that the EU would fall even further behind in terms of like electric vehicles and innovation in China or in the US. And this would be it.
And that's an important warning indeed. Well, thank you very much for all these insights. I guess we can give a big round of applause to all of the panelists. Before we move to the next roundtable, I think our community managers would like to take a picture. Let me now call upon the stage the participants in the second roundtable. The second roundtable will address the issue of inclusivity. How can we make sure that transportation and mobility remain affordable for all and inclusive as well? And to discuss this, I'd like to welcome Brian Caulfield. Brian, you're a professor of transportation at Trinity College in Dublin. You're also an expert to the Irish National Transport Authority. Charlotte Alpern. Charlotte, you're a researcher at the Center for European Studies and Comparative Politics at Sciences Po in Paris. And finally, Madeleine Maas. Madeleine, you're an architect and urban planner, and you're the founding president of the Atelier Soil in France. Please take your seat. And we'll kickstart this roundtable immediately with the opening question. How can we make sure that a decarbonized mobility remain an inclusive mobility and is available to all? Brian, would you like to start?
Yep, of course. So first of all, thank you very much for the invite here today. It's a great pleasure to represent Ireland and Dublin, the city that I come from. How do we make it more inclusive? I suppose my own examples in Ireland, one of the things that we're doing, the big thing we're doing to decarbonise transport, 60% of the decarbonisation is going to come from electric vehicles. And those electric vehicles have been sold in very wealthy parts of the country that have very good levels of public transport. So perhaps maybe that's not the way to start, that we shouldn't be giving incentives for people to own electric cars when they have good public transport availability. I suppose maybe that's one of the first things. I really enjoyed the first panel. There was fantastic insights in it. I think the key thing is dialogue and discussion with people, bringing people with them when it comes to mobility. I think that's vitally important. One of the things that we suffer with a lot, I think, as a sector is the thing we call in Ireland whataboutery. So, I want to do this, but what about that? I want to put a bus on here, but, well, no one can take that bus. And it's this constant knocking back of any good ideas, how we get around that to improve the inclusivity of transport. And also coming from a country that has a huge amount of rural, a vast majority of our population live in rural Ireland, how to get them on board and how to provide adequate and strong rural transport is a key issue, because that's where the majority of emissions, at least in Ireland, are, and any other European, any other part of Europe that has a lot of rural people. And that's another area. And I suppose, as the only male person invited to the panel, one of the key things I think is, gender inclusivity is a huge important thing that we need to look at. And we need to look at in the case of how we
be more inclusive towards men.
I think we've had centuries of that. But I think more inclusive towards how we design our systems and how we provide mobility for everybody, I think, is really important.
Thank you. Charlotte, same question.
All right. First, thank you for having me here. It was indeed a great first panel, so I hope we can live up to the challenge with this one. Anyway, just to address the question, maybe two quick points. One thing is that cities are no islands. There are no islands in the sense that it has been a great place for innovative mobility. It has been a great place to think on what could be forward-thinking alternatives to car use. It has been a great place to think about how to ride a bike, also think about pedestrians. We haven't talked much about pedestrians and walking, actually, until now, and I think it's a big point to mention. We've been talking also about investment, about new public-private partnerships, about private investments, so lots of very, very interesting things. However, sort of forgotten along the way, first, that there is life beyond the hardcore city centers, and we need to include and think about the margins of those cities. the suburban areas, but also about the wider areas. And if I think about my, the city where I live at the moment, which is Paris, I don't think we've made a lot of progress in terms of thinking about the metropolitan area and how to develop those policies at the metropolitan level, and to think about how to take into account the different ways in which we can include also spatially, but also socially, different groups living there. And Paris, of course, is one of the cases that comes to my mind, but there are lots of different cases across Europe. Just finished working on a project in which we also looked at medium and small-sized cities. And it's quite interesting to see that in a number of European countries, there is no tool in order to, or for cities, to think about their functional urban area. So everyone at the Commission level is speaking at the moment about a new generation of SUMPs, of sustainable urban mobility plans, that would be developed at the country level or at the functional urban area level. But in a number of countries, there is no tool for such thing. Cities have no right legally to introduce that. Think about Lithuania, Romania just introduced it a few years ago. So it's not something that comes directly. So that's the first point. So to think about it in terms of, city are no islands, and to think about how to scale up from the solutions that were invented or developed in those centers, and see whether they're adaptable or whether we need to think specifically about the needs of those areas beyond the city centers and in less densely populated areas. The second point maybe is that we need to think about maybe something which would be a bit more radical. So we've been talking, and I think we all could agree on the fact that the more alternatives to car use there are, the more accessible and inclusive solutions are beyond the car use. This is a nice way to think about shifting and improving mobility generally, and we know about walking, cycling, and public transport, of course. But we could also think about the way to reorganize our cities or to reorganize our territories and the way we live, to bring some of the services closer to where population is. So we also did a nice work with the city of Manchester as part of this EU funding. It was a Horizon 2020 project, and we worked on the case of Manchester, where they were trying to think about the mobility, which is mobility demand outside of transport. So for example, if you work in the health sector, in health, where do you organize those health services? Are they organized in one hospital? How are they organized around the city? How do you access them? And in Manchester, they've been trying to bring together the transport and the health sectors to talk together about how to reorganize the way the city functions and how the services are being spread out in the city. And that's not an easy thing to do. You would think, two different sectors in one city, easy to bring those 15 people around the same table. Well, those sectors, they work in silo, and we could say exactly the same thing for all the different sectors and policy areas in that city. So this is a lot of people. So how do you think in terms of decarbonizing transport, not just in transport, but outside of transport, in order to improve accessibility to public services and to different services in the city? Because at the end of the day, this is what will increase the well-being for the citizens, not just for the wealthiest and in the core urban area, but also beyond that. Sorry, I hope I haven't been too long.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Charlotte. Madeleine, urban design, that's also your field. So how can we use also urban design and architecture at large to make transportation more inclusive?
So thank you to invite me, invite an architect, an urban designer in this debate. Forgive me to read my speech. It's my first time in English in presentation. So
that's quite okay, don't worry.
As an architect and planner, my role is to design public spaces, just design, not to force certain practices, but to support the mobility transition. I have to create the base condition for an easy and intuitive access to public transport. When we talk about inclusivity and decarbonization mobility, for me it means three things. The first thing is mobility for all regions, all territories, and my role is to design an alternative ways in this country, the famous white areas, I don't know in English, les zones blanches, the zone where there is no public transport, no rail transport. The second thing is mobility for all modes. Bicycling, walking. Walking is often there is no real reflection about walking in the city. Or space for walking. The car shapes the cities. And the third things is mobility for everyone. Mobility for all ages, all sensibilities, and for example, children. Antoine Grange was talking about freedom to have a trip by car, freedom to have a car, but freedom for children who walk on the streets. The real freedom is to walk alone without parents to go to the school. It's an alternative and decarbonized mobility. It's also a subject to treat, and it's a subject for architects like me.
Thank you very much, Madeleine. Brian, I'd like to come back to your idea of a problem that we have is that we often knock down any good idea because it is not perfect enough. And I often feel that not just in the field of mobility, but in the field of decarbonization at large, we are often looking for the silver bullet. And the problem in looking for the ideal solution is that we're knocking down any other solution because it's not ideal enough, but we end up possibly with no solution because we've knocked down all of the others.
Yeah, it's definitely a big issue in Ireland, and I think across the world as well. It's this almost paralysis by analysis, and any idea that you put out there is, unless it's absolutely perfect, is not going to work. I give you a good example. Last week I tweeted about the new guided busways that are being launched in Perth, and I had about 50 people explain to me that, Brian, that's just a bus. I said, yes, of course it's just a bus, but it's, you know, in terms of the lead time and the construction time, it's really quick. But Brian, it's just a bus. We need rails, and that's and that was the issue that I was getting there. But in Ireland, we've at the moment there's a 4-kilometre piece of extension to a light rail line that's going to take 10 years to build between planning and getting it over the line. I think we don't have, and this is why this initiative is fantastic. We don't have time for knocking back any ideas at the moment. We have, you know, the sword of Damocles hanging over us in terms of climate change, and we all have to decarbonize really quickly. So all ideas, I think, are on the table, and we need to look at them. Obviously, perfection is great, and that's what we would all strive towards. But I don't think that we've got the time for it, and I don't think that we've the time to, you know, in Dublin at the moment, we're looking to build an underground system to the airport. We have been looking to do it for about 50 years. We don't have the time for those types of lead times into projects anymore. I think that that's kind of been and gone. We need to look differently at our mobility systems, and I really like what was been spoken about around the 15-minute city, looking at where people have moved to and from and what's the purposes of where they're moving to and from. But we just need to do things a lot quicker. And, you know, things like, I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to technology, that an app is going to fix everything, or that if this one fare card across Europe is going to fix. I suppose I live in an island. It's very rare that it's very rare I take a train to France. But I a little bit of a skeptic about some of those kind of technologies that they will save us. I'm not sure yet.
Thank you. Charlotte, coming back to one point you mentioned, you said cities are no islands. And yet, when we discuss mobility at an urban level, we often tend to focus on those who live in the inner core of the city, with the risk of neglecting those who are users of the city because they work in the city or because they need services and facilities in the city, but they don't live in the city. And the transportation map itself says a lot about how we conceive and imagine the city. And I'd like you to reflect a little bit more on that, and possibly using the example of Paris and the Grand Paris, and how we can project cities that are inclusive of all of their users and not just people who live in the inner core of the city.
So Paris is probably one of the worst case scenario. You were talking about the silver bullet. We can speak about other examples in France. We can speak about Lyon, for example. We can speak about Bordeaux. I mean, there are other cities that have, I think, addressed this issue a bit differently.
The simple fact that we just learned that there were other cities in France than Paris.
I was born in Lyon, so I'm very touchy about this particular thing. This is the secret. But anyway. No, but just to come back to your question, I think there are two ways to address it. I think one answer is that in order to think about this, we need to have governance reforms. And they usually are the unsexiest thing, you could put forward to everyone, really. No one really wants to think and reflect on their governance reform and how the administration functions and reorganizing political portfolios and how people are getting elected and so on. This is probably not, the easiest thing to do. Yet, we know from those cities that have been able to have some integrated planning, integrated services for mobility, to try to think beyond the core urban area, that those reforms are quite important and they are absolutely necessary if you want to deliver on those objectives. It doesn't need to be a new government taking all the powers from the municipalities, because this is usually the kind of fear, that would, push this thing back. We could think about an alliance, the Verbände that you have, for example, in the German context. They had those associations for quite some time, and it helps think and plan your system differently. We could think also about the initiatives that took place quite similar here in this country or in Belgium, in Flanders, sorry, not all of Belgium, but just Flanders, with the Vervoerregios, where you bring together also at a more metropolitan level some thinking in terms of planning, and not just planning, but also policy making and policy services in the context of mobility and infrastructure planning. So we need to have those governance reforms, because this could be one of the ways to take this conversation beyond the core urban areas. And to some extent, some of the cities, because you might argue, okay, maybe if you live in the core area, you're the mayor of Paris, you're the mayor of Antwerp, you're the mayor of Budapest, you're the mayor of Barcelona, you may think that they might not want to involve and engage in this more territorial or metropolitan discussion. But on the other hand, they absolutely need it if they want to deliver on the objectives and the targets that they've set themselves to achieve in some 30 to 40 years' time. They absolutely need to get the buy-in from those neighboring municipalities and to have a joint arena to discuss this, to deliberate, to share also the costs, to think on how they're going to allocate that, and also what are the services that could be invented outside of the core urban area and maybe feed into what they are developing themselves. So this, coming back to governance reforms, this is also for member states to allow those cities to go that far. And in a number of countries in Europe, again, metropolitan building is not something which is quite common. It is not necessarily allowed in the law of every country, or it is not necessarily pushed as an important solution by member states. So I think national states have to be members in this discussion. Sorry if this is the political scientist speaking. I love governance reforms. I think they're absolutely critical and great to study. So.
Who doesn't like governance reforms? Huh? Thank you very much, Charlotte. Madeleine, a point that I'd like to hear you a bit more about is the issue of walking, and walking as a means of transportation. And very often, as you rightly said, we forget that a lot of the mobility is done on foot as well. And how can we perhaps better combine this mobility on foot with mobility with other means of transportation? And do you think of cities that have done a great job in that regard?
There is a lot of reflection about walking in the cities. We need to design a new network world. We need to make choice. It demands political courage, but we live in the finite space, and we need to redesign, redevelop different world networks. And the walking is really not really reflected, non, pas réfléchi, by the architects, the urban designer, and I think the job has changed. The job of architect or urban designer has changed, and it's not just about landscape. It's just not about a beautiful spaces. We need to think about mobility in the project, and mobility is a science. Is not a science very sexy for architects, but to design public spaces is fundamental. And when I was in AREP is an agency, architecture agency of railway, French railway company, historical SNCF. It was the heart of the subject. The reflection of the intermodal space is very important. There is a lot of strategy, mobility strategy, decarbonizing mobility strategy. But as an architect, as an urban designer, we need to have a special view about this intermodal space. We need to treat this space like the station, like the rail station, like the bus station, with the same care, and also to refresh the space.
And do you feel that there is a shift right now in the world of urban planning and architecture in that direction? As you've said, that has not always been a priority when it came to urban design, to say the least.
No, it's not always a priority, but it's a question of livable city. Not desirable. I don't like the term of desirable. The real term is a livable city, and I think there is a shift in the architectural movement, in the business of architecture and urban design.
Thank you. Time for questions? Yes. Oh, I see two over there. And I don't have a good view of that, and two over there. So we'll take the two on the left, then we'll take the two on the right.
Thank you very much. Dea van Europe, Utrecht University. Thank you very much for your insight here. The name of the panel is Mobility for All, and also an inclusive shift. And so here I was imagining we would hear a lot about different kinds of people, including different populations, and the inclusivity of that. In Europe, we have a very rapidly aging population. And I'm wondering, in your discussion about government reform, how can this shift towards decarbonization, using different kinds of modes, whether it's public transportation or shared electric vehicles or walking, how does that include the more than 20% of the European citizens that are going to be over 65 very soon?
Important question. Thank you. Please.
Yes. Thank you, Sandrine Garnier. I'm a journalist from French media, which is Mobilicity. And I would ask one simple question. On your opinion, what is a good balance between rules and incentive in order to change people's habits in mobility upon citizens?
We'll start with these two questions. How to provide mobility for the elderly, because none of us is getting any younger. And what's the right balance between the carrot and the stick? Who'd like to start?
I can start off, and I think it's a great question about how we accommodate that 20% of the population and other parts of the population that need mobility. How we do it is by design, and inclusive design, and having everybody at the table when the design is happening. And again, to go back to my own city, one of the examples that we see, we have a housing crisis and a transport crisis. And the thing that we see is that the people that live near the really good public transport are the people that are now retired, and they're not traveling as much. So there's these two problems that we're trying to tackle at the same time. But I think that the best way to do it is by inclusive design and discussion and dialogue, as I said at the start. And you know, I did give out about the fact that it's taken 10 years to build a light rail, 4 kilometres of light rail in Dublin. It's really important to have the discussions. It's really important to have discussions with communities and have that part work. Those 10 years, at least 5 of them have been wasted, or sorry, maybe less, due to politics. But the discussion and the dialogue and getting everybody on board is really important. And I'm not sure if you want me to say anything about carrot and stick now, or
please.
It depends on how fast you need to go. if you want to, we've a 50% reduction target in emissions from transport in Ireland by the end of the decade. Last year, emissions went up by 6%. So if we want to hit that 2030 target, I think it's kind of getting to the dystopian things that were spoken about at the start of the session, where we maybe have a 15-minute city where it is actually what the conspiracy theory people think it is. If it depends on how fast you need to go,
but we need to go fast. Huh?
We do need to go fast, but reaching the targets that some countries have that seem unrealistic, and then when we have unrealistic targets that everybody doesn't believe in, you see what happens. It happened in the UK last week, and it happened in the UK earlier today, that they've cancelled the northern part of high-speed rail, and that's all about inclusivity and levelling up and bringing economic development across the whole of the UK. But our former partners have decided to go a different way, and that is what it is.
Charlotte?
Yeah. There's two great questions. I'll start with the second one. We forgot sermons, but let's come back to carrots and sticks. I think we were led to believe, I think in the past 15 years, that experimentations would be enough, and that scaling up would follow immediately. And we know now that it's not the case. It's not the case because experimentations, they're interesting in those areas that are maybe the wealthiest, because this is where private companies, public ones can develop new innovations and how they can be put further. And we know that in those more rural areas or those areas where it would be maybe less attractive, this might not be the case. We were talking about the transport system in Paris. We know that the problem is not going to be with the new tram lines or the new Greater Paris Express, but the major issue in Paris is how do you modernize, how do you upscale this very, very old railway, metro, RER system. And we have similar situations all across Europe in those cities where we have very, very old networks. So how do we mix this tension? So my opinion on this is that you need both. I completely agree with what was said before. We need both. And in order to speed up and to scale up, we definitely need to think about enforcement. We need to think about enforcement as a way to deploy those measures to other areas. We need to think about it also in terms of maybe explaining a bit more what is the desirability of enforcing those measures to the rest of the population and to those spatial areas. But at the same time, we also need to bring in those mitigation packages and those social policies that are going to make it affordable to those with lower incomes and those that couldn't afford it otherwise. So this is a way to think about carrots and sticks, but not on its own, but as part of a broader approach of mobility, which also takes into account the wider social impacts. Not just transport for itself and in itself, but also taking into account social impacts. And this is not always the case, right? When you think about transport policy, you have targets on its own, but not necessarily how to take this further. And so this brings me to the first question about elderly people. I think more generally we can think about people with reduced mobility, PMR, and how this is being taken into account in the way we plan mobility services and mobility networks. And there again, in so many cases, we think about sort of average customer, right? When you plan a tramway, when you plan a bus, when you plan a bicycle, you don't necessarily need about the children, you don't necessarily think about elderly, you don't necessarily think about all the different ways through which you could use those vehicles. So how do we make this affordable? And I think this is where public authorities have a big role to play in the way they organize a procurement system, in the way they price those eligibility criteria, and the way they sort of give a vision on how to do that. And on a minor note, in the work that we did with Greater Manchester, how to include elderly people in the discussion about transport was also part of that discussion with the health and social care system, because we also want to think about where these people are going to live in the future when they can't drive their cars anymore. How can they access shops, local services, public services? So it also brings us back to planning our cities differently, maybe not the 15-minute city, but at least some alternatives that will make it possible for the people who will not be able to move so easily to access those services.
Madeleine.
Okay.
Any idea for the elderly and the carrots and the sticks?
I want to share with you two things. The first thing is, as an architect, the theory of affordance. It's a little bit like the nudge concept. I believe in this theory. Let me read the definition. Affordance is a characteristic of an object and environment that suggests to its user its mode of use. By designing public spaces for cycling and walking, we encourage and enable users to work on ownership of these different types of mobility. We don't create demand, it exists, but we make it easier to switch to these different types of mobility. We create the condition to make the definition. I have two playgrounds as an architect, the bus station and the forecourts of rail station, for example. There is two spaces, two playgrounds for architects, very important to engage a comfortable transition. And I think the ergonomic of this space is very important to engage the switch to the mode.
Thank you. We had two questions from that side of the room. If you could raise your hand again. Thank you.
Yes, hello. Well, thank you first of all for all the great insights that you give so far. My name is Michelle. I'm a recent graduate from the EIT Urban Mobility Master School. And during my thesis, I ran into a problem for, like, all of us are here with our own stories, and also we value inclusivity in a different manner. And how do you think that we could bring together all those anecdotes and micro stories and like create one or multiple effective and sustainable solutions out of those different micro stories?
Interesting. And the second question, please.
Hi, I'm Amina from DWS. Many thanks for the great insight. So from DWS, we are investing and refurbishing buildings in cities in Europe. And just a question, when we're talking about buildings, we're talking going from home, commuting, or going from home to an equipment. And mobility is taking more and more place in our long-term program and designs. And to what extent is there any strategy at the building level that could foster, let's say, mobility, and especially inclusion in mobility? And is there any takeaway tool, equipment we should not foster or forget as builders to foster, let's say, inclusivity in buildings?
Thank you. That's a specific question. What kind of equipment is needed in buildings? And how can we build up on the micro stories, on the anecdotal evidence, and which is, circulated around it? That's a typical topic for conversation as well. How we've encountered difficulties, obstacles, or what was great also about transportation. How can we build up on that?
Oh, you're looking at me.
No, you're looking at me. So.
Michelle, congratulations on graduating. There's an example in Dublin called Overheard on the Bus, and it's a Twitter account, and all the micro stories you'd want to hear about the good, the bad, and the ugly of being on bus transport. I think it's a very good idea of getting all of this type of information together, and we've got lots of AI at the moment that could harvest it and get lots of fantastic insights. Perhaps it's something that Transdev could consider as part of the mobility sphere as an action that could be undertaken. I'm getting a very positive nod here in the front row. So the second question is more difficult and more technical, and I'm not sure of a solution, but I can identify spaces in our urban areas that will be freed up, hopefully, and they're big car parks. In many cities across Europe, we have very large concrete structures as homes for cars to sleep in. Perhaps that's where we could be using space for shared mobility, for inner city gardens, for many different things. We could reimagine that for housing. We could reimagine these concrete structures to revitalize our cities. How we do that, I don't know. I'll defer to the architect, as she may have much better insights on that than I have.
Thank you. on the user experience, and I'm always also struck by how many times, as a user of public transportation, I've been willing to provide some suggestions, or I've noticed a few things that were impractical, sometimes in the scheduling or in the intermodality, or in the way the mean of transportation was designed. And I've always been kind of frustrated that I could not voice these concerns to the company or to the operator so that it would be taken into account. And similarly, I wonder, and I'm sure you have some insights on that, Charlotte, on what can be the role of users association. There are plenty of users association of public transport, and how can we work with them to build more inclusive, affordable, and decarbonized transport?
Yeah. So I agree with you, and always when you have those numbers, you do wonder whether someone is actually reading the queries at the end of the line or listening to the answering machine. But so I think that's one of the ways we can think about it. Social media has helped quite a lot in bringing those voices, so those experiences and the different stories that were told via Twitter, now X, and through different ways, and Instagram and so on. It has sort of brought more attention and alternative routes in order to express those micro stories, but also some concerns and some demands. And so, in a sense, those different ways to voice those concerns have been feeding into the work that was done by users associations for some time. There are quite minor players in a number of those policy areas. They are taken into account. But when we look at policy making, when we look at decision making, it's not necessarily the first player that you would bring around the table if you were to plan, let's say, a metro system, or if you were to plan a new tram line, or if you are to think about investment. Of course, you're going to take them into account as your group of stakeholders that you have to include at some point, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to influence and shape the results. So maybe by bringing those different repertoires, and working through the social media and bringing attention, but also putting pressure and continuously on public authorities and operators, this could be a way to listen to their voices a little bit more. So this would be my and I think if we look at the way, I think there was someone from UITP before, but I think part of the work that UITP has been doing in the past, and I've been working with UITP in this former H2020 project that I mentioned. It's also part of the work also of those associations in public transport, to bring in those different stakeholders. Now, maybe coming to the second question, I'm sure Madeleine would have much more insights about this, but I just want to give one aspect to it. When I think about equipment, it's a little bit like technology. I think, okay, maybe, of course, this is going to help and this is going to bring inclusiveness, but it's maybe not the only thing. And when I look at the cities and the way through which the shift away from car-dominated network has been organized, part of the equipment has been to build sidewalks, not just to build them, but to maintain them, to make sure that they would be practical for different types of people that would be walking alongside them. People want to go fast, and those that going at a slower pace. We all remember those images from London. I think it was some strikes on the tube a few years ago when you had those people rushing to work, and then the other ones, trying to pay themselves quite slowly the sidewalks, and there just wasn't enough room for them. But there were all those risk for cars. So sidewalks would be one of them, and then how to organize and maintain public space. And of course, this may seem very naive or quite self-evident, but it is not that self-evident when we look at a number of cities within Europe, especially outside of the big ones. If we look at medium and small-sized cities, let alone rural areas where we have to think also about those alternatives. And when we live outside Europe and beyond those borders, this is also something that we need to take more into account. So sidewalks, I would say.
And Madeleine, maybe first, as the architect in the room, I need to tell you, what is the equipment that we should not forget when we build a building, a house, or whatever? And then possibly you might have also some reflections on how to build upon anecdotal evidence to actually build something more structured and perhaps more consistent out of these different pieces anecdotal evidence?
Yeah, it's very difficult because it depends of the neighborhood, the size of the building, the operation. But I think the building should be like an intermodal space. We need to good dimensionized the bicycle parkway services for bicycle, and there is. It's important to think the building with the connection with the public spaces. Often the architect forgets the environment of the building. It's like a beautiful building, just a building, but there is no connection, real connection with the public spaces, and the size of the sidewalk are very important too.
We have time for another round of questions. We have one here at the front row. Here, yes.
Yeah, hi, my name is Freek Bos. I'm director of the Dutch Passenger Association and board member of the European Passengers Federation. So I'm the one mentioned yet. And we get all those anecdotal evidence of things that go wrong, but also on good ideas. We transfer all these anecdotal evidence into really good plans, I hope, at least. So my question wouldn't be to the panelists, but to Manu instead, because he is the CEO of the Dutch Transdev company. And I would like to ask if he can say what our role is, and if it really helps that we are here, and if you, or are we just a pain in the ass, and that we can just leave the room and say, well, we need to pay the ticket price and then go home. Can you say something? Because if I answer the question raised by the panelists, what's...
Absolutely, and I think that's the ultimate test of inclusivity. A question from the audience directed to another member of the audience. I think, you know, we're breaking the boundary between the panelists and the audience here.
Thank you, Frick. Now, you know that we really appreciate the way that, well, especially you, the image you brought the last couple of years. Before, passengers, mainly the local ones, were more complaining. We heard before, only complaining doesn't help. So if we're talking about solutions, and being realistic in the solutions and options we have, we talk together on the options, it's really a plus. So please continue doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Another question from the audience? Or panelists, you should feel free also to ask a question to the audience if you wish.
Hi, my name is Farha. I work for the province of Flevoland.
Sorry, you work for?
For the province of Flevoland.
Okay.
So next to Amsterdam, kind of. And my question in sign of inclusivity, I struggle with a lot is, I think it's very important that there's social security everywhere in mobility, but how can we trace social insecurity and how can we battle it? What is your point of view on that?
Social insecurity.
Yeah, I think from my perspective as somebody that works in an engineering school, it's all about data and having the data on how and when and where people are moving. I think that's the vital thing, and I think you see that right across Europe. I know in my city there's a certain time of night that the people on public transport all look the exact same, and that females, elderly people are just they don't feel secure or safe using public transport. And how we get around that, I think, is by data, better enforcement. It's something, again, that we need to be stronger on, I think. But it's by having that data, explaining the data, and showing that it is, first of all, a massive issue, I think is one of the things that we can do. I also love this gorilla questioning that happened here at the front of the room. I thought that was great.
Then you shall, and maybe if you have some examples of, you know. that have proven successful in fighting social insecurity?
Well, I don't have examples, but there's a fantastic report that was commissioned in Ireland in a woman's shoes, and it was a longitudinal survey of over 1,000 women and asking them how they felt about cycling, because there's a huge gap in cycling in Ireland, 80-20 in favour of males using public transport.
80-20 in favour of males. Oh,
yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And how we get past that gap. And I think it's by, you know, a lot of better design. And there was a great paper that I read recently from a professor in Melbourne, and she basically did these round group tables looking at how to design a new cycle network. And they put a bunch of male engineers into a room to design the network, and then a bunch of female engineers into to design the network. The outcome was very different. And if you want to get past that, you know, the 80-20 thing that we have in Dublin, that's one of the ways to do it.
Thanks. Charlotte.
I agree with what has been said before, but I think to add to this, I'd like to pick up on the last point that was mentioned now. When we look at the expertise that is going into transport planning and transport policy making these days, it has become much more diverse. And this is directly supporting the way we're thinking about, you know, social security being one of them, but bringing a gender perspective to transport planning and transport policy making, thinking about different ages, thinking about ethnic also diversity, which is something that has been addressed by a number of our colleagues, for example, in the UK or in other countries in Europe. So I think bringing in this expertise is a way not to say that engineers shouldn't be planning transport, or that they should, you know, be the ones, you know, supporting this, but that we should have different types of expertise within a government, or within a transport agency, or within a transport company, a transport operator, in order to think about transport, to bring different perspectives, to bring in those controversies that are taking place on the streets, you know, but to bring them in-house in order to think about them and to have them addressed. So, of course, you know, if we look at, don't want to, you know, to look at the history of things, but there were engineers, and then the economists came in with, okay, oh, that's diversity for you. But then the real diversity arrived when we had sociologists, psychologists, and when we had architects, and a really wide range of expertise. And now we're thinking a bit more, I think, in transport about participatory policy making and how to bring the public in the picture, not just to inform them and to consult them, but to actually co-design and to develop jointly together with them, you know, some of the solutions and some of the services that could be implemented in the transport sector. So maybe this is one of the ways that I would answer in complement to what has been said.
I just to add to that, I don't think it shouldn't be just tokenistic, that the people that are in the room have a real voice and a real say, because it's vitally important, as you say.
Madeleine.
So I agree with you, and I can just say it's a question of co-visibility also. We have to design public spaces with comfort, very comfortable public spaces, and the co-visibility is very important to ensure. Pour répondre quoi, à ça quoi.
And so, to address.
Sorry.
To address the concern.
Yes. The city has been shaped by the car to be efficiency city, and there is no space for children, for family, and there is encore again more women who were the children in the playground, etc. And this environment is not adapted today. It's not very comfortable and very secure.
You would say it's a matter of the visibility of the users and of the vulnerable users, or also a matter of visibility of the equipment?
The both.
Okay.
But the visibility of the users is very important.
We have time for another round of questions. Yes, there is one question at the back here.
Thanks a lot. My name is Artur Krul. I'm a neuroscientist, but I'm interested in the ecological psychology of built environment. So I guess my question is for the architect in our panel, and the question is...
That would be you, Madeleine.
I mean, the others can feel free to. So the question is like, we have this, so the part of the inclusivity is understanding the needs of the users, right? So you mentioned this affordances, right? Like what the environment affords to the users, to different kinds of users. So we now have a technology like a virtual reality, which is used for all kinds of weird things, but why not make it part of studying the actual spaces that we design? So take like a representative group of people from the population and get them to actually experience the space before building it. Is that something that is integrated into the design of the built environments, or?
Good question. Is it something we can do, or that we're doing already, like get a panel of users to test the equipment of the building before we actually build the building?
In this project in general?
In general, I think.
How consider how to integrate the different panel? It's a question.
No, well, the question is when a car manufacturer designs a car, there will be a kind of beta model of the car, and there will be a panel of users test driving the car before the car is put into production. Can we imagine the same kind of scheme when we build buildings, that is to have users testing the building before we actually proceed to the construction of the building?
Voilà. Normally, when you are a good architect, you can anticipate, you can observe, you have to understand all the needs of the users. But it's a good question. It's difficult for me to answer, but je sais pas.
But is it common practice in architecture or not?
Not really.
Not really.
Not really. It's true, but I think my job is going to change, and all the architects have to take in consideration new things, more grid panel of users, and for example. We realized a new cartography of pedestrian flow, cartography of comfortable, of what I feeling when I am in front of a building. In a building, it's a little bit new. It's not just a plan masse. It's a reflection about flows, of conditions, of comfort, climate, etc., etc.
Do we have time for one final question? Well, we have time, but is there a final question? So I'm putting the pressure on the audience then. All right, if there are no final questions, I suggest we give a big round of applause to the panelists. And I will also ask you to proceed to the center stage for the picture. All right. Without further ado, it is now time to proceed to the keynote speeches that we'll have to conclude this afternoon. And I'm very glad to say, and we're very privileged to have keynote speeches by two women leaders in their respective field in politics and neuroscience. I think it is not so common to have so many women panelists and keynote speakers, and I think that is something that should be commended. For this event. The first one is by Minister Elke van den Brandt. Elke, you're the Minister for Transport and Mobility for the Brussels region. You're coming to the end of your term because there are elections coming up next year. During your term, you've been awarded a number of prizes and recognition for your forward thinking and foresight view on mobility. you've recently implemented a new traffic scheme in the city of Brussels called the plan Good Move. And I'm hoping that you can tell us how improved mobility can help shape a fairer and more sustainable city. That's the title of your speech. So the floor is yours for about half an hour. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much. You're going to have to practice your split vision because you have to look on the screen and look at me. So good luck with that. I have no idea how you're going to manage. And for me, it's also a little test because I don't have the remote control and I'm looking at, okay, Simon, who is going to implement remote control. We've been all afternoon, so before we start, we'd like you to do a small exercise. We're all away. You can sit down. You don't have to get up. We've been away from home now, so I want you to reimagine being at home. Just go back home for 1 second. And by doing so, I want to ask you, in which room are you? Are you in the bedroom? You can move your hands, because otherwise it's very awkward for me. Are you in your kitchen? Are you in the living room? Here we go. Are you in the corridor? Nobody. Well, and still, you're not in the corridor. And I think that's a question, that's what I wanted, that nobody would raise their hands on the corridor. And you're all raising your hands on the living room. Why is that? If we look at our cities, and we look at our homes, we should see the parallel. If we've had an architect. If we build a home, then the function of the home, the first map is not, let's build a corridor to get from the front door to the back door in the most efficient, fastest way. That's not how we build houses. I'm not an architect. I'm very sure we don't do it like that, no? But still, that's how we have organized our cities. We have organized our cities in how can we get from one side to the other side as fast as it can. And all the other functions of a city, like the living room, like a kitchen, like meeting other people, we've kind of excluded from the equation. It's whatever is left we can use for all the other activities. And so that means that we should change this paradigm. We should organize our cities, not like corridor cities, but like living room cities, and making sure that the first function of a city is about being together, is the first function that we take care of when we go around with urban planning. And that's something we're quite far away from. And in order to get there, we need imagination. And it was told before, if a plan is not perfect, it's not possible. I don't think we can handle any more realistic plans because they're not ambitious enough. We really need to change the shift. We really need to take people into this new idea in what a city can be. And in Brussels, about 70% of the public space is for cars. It is either in car lanes or in parking lanes. 70%. That means 30% is for the rest. For parks, for terraces, for whatever else you want to do in your city. Only 30%. So we really need to talk about mobility if we want to come to this living room city. That's crucial. We need to get there. And so in order to get people to that dream, because we don't see our cities like that. If I tell this in Brussels, it's like, oh, you're crazy. Yes, I'm crazy, but we need crazy people to get on. But if I tell this to, okay. Was signing me. If I tell this to people in Brussels, it's like, yes, but that's not what Brussels is. Often they say that's what Amsterdam is, or Utrecht, or Copenhagen, but that's not Brussels. But Brussels can be like that. And so in order to create this dream, because that was one of the questions, the micro stories we talked about before, we need to make sure that people recognize themselves in this future, that they see what it can mean. And in order to do so, we have different kind of projects. Oh, I have a remote control, thank you. Now I feel powerful. In order to do so, we have organized Brussels en Vacances, which is a project in which in the summer holidays, people can propose something for the street. And it can be something small, saying, I want a playground, I want to change, but something different for their public space in their street or in their neighborhood. And it's a huge success. Every year we have to choose between projects, and we already doubled the budget for it, but it's small projects and we give some budget. And these are some of the things, have remote control. But these are some of the examples what it can be. It's, for example, taking a parking lot, putting some sand and calling it the beach, or organizing children's play or neighborhood parties. So these are all kind of projects that are very temporary, but it makes people think about a different way of organizing their neighborhood. And it's a huge, important project, and it started in COVID. And it was a bit of an excuse, okay, well, it's COVID, people can't travel, we can't have massive activities. Most people don't have a garden, don't have a terrace. What are we going to do in this summer? So it started from that point of view, like we need to organize all these little spots of holidays. And so we saw it was a success. And so we did it in COVID, and we will continue to do it after COVID, because some good things may follow from this horrible period. And so we started this project, and if we talk to people, if we go and look at the micro stories, and that's, I'll continue talking. If we look about those micro stories, if we ask people, what did it mean for you? Then they didn't answer, oh, now I have a different way of looking at organizing public space, or I have another vision about mobility. These were not the answers we got. The answers we got were, I met my neighbors. The answer we got were, I feel more safe in my neighborhood because I know who's living in my neighborhood. I found somebody to babysit. I found somebody to walk my dog. I've met other people and I feel more at home. And I go out more. And this was something that women and elderly people mostly said. They said, I go out more and I feel more secure since this project. And that is crucial. This is, we talked about inclusivity before. This is also what inclusivity can be like. In the meantime, I'm trying to struggle. No. No single, okay. So these are really important projects. These are temporary projects, but of course we want to do it, that's in the summer, it's a small-scale project, they're not lasting. We want to create this feeling all year round. And that's why we implement this plan, which was referred to as Good Move. And it is a plan with a lot of actions in it, 50 actions about having more cycling lanes, having more public transport, creating walking corridors. But it's also about organizing mobility and circulation plans. And if you go to Birmingham or Ghent, they already have implemented those. It's the same idea we've got. It's like, how can we make sure that our neighborhood feels like our place, that it feels like home, and that you can still access by car. Some people need their car, some people are dependent on their car. Let's create as few as dependency as possible, but it is reality. So everybody can still access every neighborhood, but it is not encouraged to just drive through. And all the traffic passing through, we want to put them on the main lanes and making sure that in the neighborhoods, it's only local traffic. And to do so, technology can be a good thing, but thanks to Waze and all the other applications, we really need to change how our cities are organized. So we implemented this circulation scheme, making sure that cars who enter a neighborhood, go in, would end up quite at the same place, so it's not interesting to pass through. And then you create a neighborhood where you only have local traffic. And to do so, we divided Brussels into 50 neighborhoods, because Brussels is big, come and visit us. So we divide Brussels in 50 neighborhoods, and we're doing neighborhood by neighborhood. We started in the historical heart of Brussels, the city center. And so we've implemented this at the beginning. Huge crisis, the world would explode, the shops would go bankrupt, people wouldn't come and visit us anymore. You know the stories, I see you nodding. Every mobility project has started with this apocalypse. Now help me. Going on. So this is, oh, no. This, I'm sorry for this side of, but you have me, that's also good. It's working, but I can't control it. But anyhow, I can control it. Okay. So we've implemented this circulation scheme, and what do we see as a result? After 1 year, it's now in place for 1 year. Brussels is still alive and kicking. The restaurants and the bars have exploding figures. They're super happy. There's a few of them who have been bankrupt and are mad, but most of them do very well. And if you look into details, those going bankrupt are often those who had other elements as well. I'm not saying that nobody had any trouble with it, but in general, we see good results for the economy. People are coming to the center of Brussels. People are visiting. It is crowded, and they're using sometimes a car because you have different parking spaces. We have free parking and rides that we've entered. So people can still come to the city of Brussels. but they also come by train, they come by bike, they come on different ways, and so we see that it is a positive element. And if you go back to the impact, if you see what it has done, now we need to get away. No. No. No, this one. So these are, but if you see the impact, we see that there's about 20% of fewer cars in the historical heart of Brussels, 20% of cyclists that gone up. The commercial speeds, a very important argument. Buses and trams are not stuck in traffic anymore, so we have adopted some of the crossroads, and so they're going faster, they're gaining on regularity, and this is economically interesting for us for a budget as well. And there are 8 new little squares and parks that have been developed, and we now can reimagine, recreate. So the impact is positive. And if you look at how we did it, there's some pictures of before and afterwards. This is one spot, and as you can see, they often say it's about closing streets. It's not about closing streets, it's about opening streets. It's about opening streets to the terrace. And this is the other side. This is the open street. We have a large terrace now, and if you go back to the previous slide, you can see it used to be a car. Yes, we closed down the street for cars, but we opened it up for all other uses of the street. And so this is one example of how we've implemented it, and there's different examples. And I think the most famous example of what we've done in Brussels, and that's the previous slide, is a pedestrian area. It was the same project, so it's been 10 years ago now. It was a project, and it started off, it's not a political project, it started off by people, citizens, picnicking in the heart of the city center of Brussels, in front of the Bourse, which is our central building. And there's a 2x2 car lane. You see it above, 2x2 car lane, ugly, smelly. You don't like to go there. And as a woman, I was afraid to go there at night. And so we started picnicking on a Sunday. We just went and ate our sandwiches. And so it became such a strong signal that politics had to follow. Politics had to follow and made it a pedestrian area. And it's like an Olstein. It began like a rather small pedestrian area, and bigger. But you see now every year there's new streets being added to the pedestrian area, even if it's not formal, because cars just can't get through because so many people using it and using the street. And so we see the difference in what it can be, and I think that's important. Because I started by saying we need to sell the dream. We need to tell people that if we go to the future and we tell that in 2030, we have tackled climate issues, we've created resilient cities, and if we come back to today, we have to sell what we've seen in 2030, and what we've seen in 2030, it's quite good. It's a nice place to live. It is a place with trees, a place where you can go out, where you can leave your children play, where you're at ease, where you can meet your neighbors, where there's no heat waves in the summer or no flooding also in summer, last summer in some countries. But it is a resilient city, and a resilient city, it's good for climate change. It's also really good to live in, and I think that's really important, that we need to show to people what they can win and how good it can be for people living in it. So that's the issue. So creating this city where it's nice to live in, creating public space like our home. And now we need to do 3 things. We need to create cities or public space where you feel welcome, where you feel safe, and where it's healthy. Now start with the first, welcome, because the previous debate was about inclusivity, and there was this question, okay, inclusivity, what is it all about? It's a big term, there's a lot behind this term, and an inclusive city is really crucial. And there's one example I always use to talk about, it's for whom are we creating this city? And the next slide is an example. It used to be, it's a very long, small park next to a railroad. And where you're standing, there's a gate, because it can be closed. It's always opened. And so it's a public space. It's been created, I think, about 8 years ago. And when it opened up, it's my neighborhood, I live there. When it opened up, nobody went in. Only a few people went in. And so we start talking to people, why don't you use it? It's a wonderful place, it has a playground, it's nice. And then people reacted and they said, this can't be for us. This must be a private project. This must be a gated community. And I think that's crucial, because we've talked before in the first panel about the danger of people feeling left behind. And this is a whole neighborhood who's saying, we cannot believe that the authorities would invest in such a beautiful place for us, for me. And that's the reality in many cities. It's not typically Brussels, it's in a lot of places. So making sure that we organize and that we make sure that people feel part of the change in their city is crucial. And it's one of the biggest challenges for in Brussels. I don't have the golden bullet. Please do not ask me how to do it. It's a work in progress. You need to continue learn about it, but we need to take it seriously. Otherwise, people will feel left behind or are left behind. And I think that's quite a risk, like it's being said in the beginning in the first panel. It is about feeling, belonging, ownership. It's also about infrastructure. If we organize public space, we need to do it with inclusive design. We need universal design. You need to make sure that every project is open for everybody. The time, the money, and the energy we're now putting in correcting mistakes from the past, making sure that there's no steep hills, that everybody can get by, it's enormous. And it's for the more obvious things, like being sure that you can get through with a wheelchair, or if you have children, but it's also about mental obstacles, making sure that everybody can read the public space, that everybody knows what's happening, and everybody feeling like this is their public space. So this is quite a challenge, and universal design can put, and I'm talking to the architect now, she's nodding, universal design can and has to go really on top level. We cannot make any compromise on it. If we remake a new public space, make it good from the beginning so we don't have to correct it afterwards. It's also about symbols. Sometimes I do things, I change the name of a long tunnel. It's called the Leopold II tunnel. Leopold II was part of the colonization. He's the king of Belgium, so yeah, he's not so popular anymore. And so we changed the name to Annie Cordy, which is a famous singer in Belgium. And so it was saying, yes, it's just a symbol. It's politics of symbols. But also those symbols, they count. Because if you look at public space, the street names, about 94% of the street names that are named to a person are named to a man. And I don't want to acknowledge the importance of men in history, but women also played a role in history, and we need to show it. And it's important, because if people don't recognize themselves in public space, they won't feel part of a public space, they won't feel it's their space. So working on symbols is also something that's important. Changing the names of bus stops, making sure that the streets are renamed. These are challenges that are not just a detail, these make part of creating this inclusive city. Of course, it's not only about symbols. If you talk about inclusivity, it's not, I love this picture, I know it's not so clear, but what's happening on this picture is a group of women. Women who didn't know how to cycle and wanted to cycle. And we have all these programs on learning how to cycle or cycle in a city, because not because you can cycle that you know how to cycle in a city, and 10% of the adults in Brussels doesn't know how to cycle. So getting over this barrier is important. So we have these programs, and these are open for everybody. But what we see is that more than 90% of the participants are women. And most often, mothers, who are forced by their children saying, we want to cycle to school, and mothers feeling, okay, I need to be able to cycle, I want to be able to cycle with my child to school. And this is a very important motivator. So they enroll in this program. And in this program, we have several aspects. It's about learning how to cycle. It's also about learning how to maintain your bike, because it's often expensive to maintain your bike, and we don't have enough bike shops in Brussels to maintain. You have waiting lists, so learning how to maintain your bike. And also, for those in need of it, you can have access to a social leasing, a free leasing of a bike. You can have a free bike at the end of the process, so you can have your own bike at home. And these are programs that started off as, we had an idea and let's put it in place. But then again, if we go and talk to those women, and this is a group of women who didn't know one another, but they got to know another, and they feel empowered. That's the most strong words coming out. They're saying, we learned something. It's a good feeling, being able to learn something. We can do something we couldn't do before. We also again go further, because this is a profile of women who don't have access to a car, who didn't have access to public transport. So for them, the only way to get around was by foot. So going by bike meant going further away, farther away. Further, farther, plus loin. So this is something, and also they met one another. And all of these women have their micro-story. I love the idea of micro-stories. They all have their issues, and they felt strengthened by having other women. And so in the weekend they meet up, we go out, they make a tour on a bike, and this is becoming a group of friends, a network, a new network is being created. And so mobility here is just not a detail. It's about creating a resilient city also by its citizens and enforcing and empowering the citizens. And also this is about inclusive mobility. The last one I want to show, but I think it's less important, is about financial obstacles. We talked about physical obstacles, mental obstacles, but there's also financial obstacles. Poverty is reality, so making sure that that's not an obstacle for public transport. We reduced our ticketing prices, and we see that it has a good impact. If we reduce the tickets for until 25, you pay €1 a month, so €12 a year, which is almost for free. And what we've seen is, since we did it, we have 30% more young people having a subscription to public transport. So it has a positive impact. But I think that's stating the obvious. You know that, so I'll get fast through that. That was the first one. It was feeling welcome. Feeling like if you go outside, that it's still, you're still comme chez vous, comme chez soi. It has to feel like you're home. It has to feel that when going public space, you're not a stranger. No, you're feeling like it's your place and creating this feeling that you're welcome, that it's your public space. That's one thing. But if you come out and you think there will be a car crushing me within 3 seconds, you're not feeling safe, you won't go out either, even if you feel like it's your place. So Vision Zero, working about road security, is also crucial in making sure that we change this city and make this city a living room city. And we do that with several aspects. We reduce the speed. Then again, we did in 21. I was put on a police protection. It was like the world would go explode, there would be no economy, Brussels would explode. The same topics were told again. 2 years later, what would you see? People drive a little slower. That's okay. You can still access Brussels. You're still very welcome. But driving slower, that's crucial, can save lives. Why? If you drive slower, you have a broader vision and you can react better. So the chance of having an accident are reduced. And if there's an accident, the chance of surviving is also extremely heightened. If a pedestrian is hit by a car that's driving 50 an hour, you have 80% chance of not surviving. If the same car drives 30 an hour, you have 80% of surviving. So reducing speed, it's not popular, but it's about saving lives, and it can and it will make a real difference. So that's one of the measurements we've put in place in Brussels. You see a map of Brussels, so the before and the after. I always like before and afters. The blue is 30 an hour, the yellow is 50 an hour. And then you see it's not only becoming more secure, it's more clear. It's easier to read. You now know if you're entering Brussels, you have to drive slow. You don't have to wonder in which regime your street is and in which commune you are. No, just drive slower. Only on the main axis, we still have 50 an hour. Main axis, because we want to use people to use the main axis and then go into the neighborhoods where people live. It's the same philosophy. If you look at it, it's one element is the accident and road security. There's some hidden profits of it. We reduced the speed, and what we've seen is that we reduced noise. And it was not a goal, but noise reduction by 2. Noise pollution has reduced by 2 in the streets where we're measuring the impact of reducing the speed limit from 50 to 30. And noise is one of the most, it's the first external source of stress, so it's a crucial element. So this is some of the gains. Also about pollution, there's so many gains in driving a little bit faster, slower. Testing very weak. And one of the critics was, yes, but we will lose time. The taxi sector, the public transport sector, people saying, oh, it will take us 2 times as long to get to our destination, because if you drive slower, you get there later. So we said, okay, we'll measure that. I don't think that's true. Helsinki and Grenoble have proven that it's not true, but we'll test it. And so we've tested 10 trajectories, and what do we see? There's no significant difference. And why? Because before, the average speed in Brussels is not 50 an hour. If you go from 0 to 50 and then to the red light to 0, then you've driven for 50 an hour for about 10 seconds. But if you go from 0 to 30 and then to the light, and we've adapted the lights so that it would be more attractive, you're there at the same moment. It doesn't really make a difference. So it is counterintuitive, but you won't get late to a destination. There's really no reason not to implement 30 kilometers an hour. So that's one element. You see here nice children on the school. I think that's also crucial. It's creating a city for children. Cities are places where children live. I'm not originally from Brussels. I went there to study and I never left, classical example. And when I was pregnant, my family was really stressed to say, why are you not coming back? Because I live there, but you're pregnant. Yes. But you cannot raise a child in Brussels. Yes, you can. Other people have done it before. There are quite a lot of children in Brussels. So that's the image. You cannot raise a child, and so that's not okay. We can't accept cities that are not made for children. We just cannot accept places. Cities need to be at scale for children. It's the first measurement we need to take into account. We don't need to ask, is it good for cars? We need to ask, is it good for children? And then we can see what that means for cars, but make sure that we put our children first and put it as a central element. And we have many programs in school mobility in order to use this positive energy, because often I'm considered as a radical and there's a lot of protest, you all know this, but if you talk to people and you want to find a way to connect, children is always the best way. Nobody wants to put their children at risk, and so if you go to school and you talk to parents about clean air, about climate change, they're saying, yes, it's important. But if you talk about road security, saying, I want to make sure that my street is safe for my children. So it is the way to connect to almost everybody. So working with children, working with schools is a great way to create this public support for measurements and for actions. And I will give one example of this, because it's road security is the reverse NIMBY effect, I call it. If you ask people, and we did it, it's a secret that I'm sharing with you, we questioned Brussels. Do you like the idea of a generalized zone 30 in Brussels? We asked it before we implemented it. Not many people said yes. We asked it afterwards, not many people say yes. But then we also did some small-scale inquiries. And we asked in certain neighborhoods, what do you want in your neighborhood? And then suddenly 75% of people say, we want 30, we don't want 50. So it's something you want for you. It's reverse NIMBY. You want to have road security in your street. But in every street in a city, there are children living, there are people playing, there are people going out, there are elderly people. So making sure that people are aware of this aspect, that's what you want for you, is something that you should want for your whole city, is something that's important and that we try to continue to work on. Making sure, well, I'm going to skip that because otherwise I'm talking too long. Making sure you have infrastructure, that you enhance, that you have police controls. These are also elements. Just reducing the speed limit is not enough. You need to make sure that your city is apt to it and that you control on the speeding. I had two things. So the first thing was feeling welcome, feeling safe. The third element I want to talk about is healthy. Healthy cities, feeling healthy, making sure that public space is a healthy place to be. And that's crucial. If we look at air pollution, for example, it is costing lives. It is costing an enormous part of lives from people in Brussels. Children who are living closer to a road have more respiratory problems, so they have more asthma. So it is a real aspect. And if you look at Brussels, this is a map of Brussels, and you look at the dots, then you see that it's been increasing. So often we have a low emission zone for the whole of the region of Brussels. And so we see through the years, thanks to this low emission zone, which we talked about carrot and sticks before, it is considered as a stick, but it's actually something that's helping. And that's why I don't really hate this carrot and stick question, because I think a stick can be a carrot as well. If you ask people whether you want a low emission zone, they'll say, If you ask people whether you want healthy air for your children, they will say yes. So low emission zones are bringing healthy air to our children. And it is something that's helping improve air quality in Brussels. And I know we have to take measurements that make sure that people who live in poverty also have possibilities. So we have several measurements on it. But asking the question, what will this low emission zone do, and won't we will keep people in poverty behind? It's a good question, but the other question also needs to be asked. If we don't take this measurement, what will happen? What will it mean? And that's also a social issue. Again, if you take the map of Brussels, next slide. On the left, you see the air quality, and on the right, you see the income. So you see in Brussels, in the city center, we have the poorest neighborhoods in the center of Brussels. It's a bit an atypical way of organizing a city, but there's reason for it. And the further you go away from the center, the richer the neighborhoods become, because there's more nature and it's more suburban. And if you put it, there's a one-and-end connection. So in the poorest neighborhoods, where people have the fewest public space, air quality is the worst. Car possession is the lowest. We have about 20–30% car possession in those neighborhoods. So not doing low-emission zones is also leaving people behind, is also a social issue. And I think it's important to always ask both questions. If you put in place a low-emission zone, what will it mean for people having low incomes, but not doing it also has an impact on people having low incomes, and also make sure that this question is also on the table. So last slide I want to share with you, it's of course making the city greener, making sure that we plant trees, and again, it's the easiest way to sell climate change to people, to sell climate policy to people. Everybody wants trees in their streets. Everybody wants to have access to a park. And it's just not just something luxury. We know that people having green in their neighborhood have a better mental health. So it is really something that is helping people to be strong, to be resilient on themselves. So creating a resilient city is also creating resilient citizens. And I think that's something we can all do, and we just have to do. And just one anecdote. I started this little competition with my administration. They said, oh, planting trees, yes, but where should we plant them? I said, I don't care, but you're going to plant 1,000 trees this year. That's a lot. Yes, that's a lot. They plant 2,000 now, every year. It's just, if you say, just look for it, you can find it. Creating more nature in city, every time you can take 1 square meter of concrete, put it away, and put on some green, it is helping. All those small elements make one big difference. Of course, you need to create new parks, we're doing it, but the small things do matter as well, and many small things can give a big change. And I want to conclude with this quotation of Jane Jacobs. If we start from a white page and we should create the perfect city, I think we can do that. We have the intelligence to do so. But unfortunately, or fortunately, we're starting from living cities, existing cities. So changing a living city and creating a new one, that's why we need imagination. And that's why we need to sell a dream. We need to tell people what's in it for them. And there's a lot in it for them. I think the future is really bright. And I think if you ask people coming back, some people can time travel. People coming back from 2030 to today, they will tell you, it was difficult in the beginning. It's like going to the sport club. It's difficult. You're at home. You don't want to get changed. You don't feel tired. You don't feel like sporting. But when you come back from the sport club, you feel really well. You feel energized. It's the same with climate change. It's the same with changing our cities into resilient cities. It feels difficult now. There's a lot of difficulties, but it will be better. And we will look back and saying it was the right thing to do. And so I hope you all have the courage to continue fighting to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elke and Brandt. If you have time, and if we have time, maybe we can take a couple of questions? If there are questions, of course. Yes, there is one here and one there. So we'll take these 2 questions. Let me bring you the mic. Oh.
Thank you very much. Frédéric again. First of all, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation. I'm a Brussels sprout. I live in Brussels, and I have experienced those changes, 30 kilometers, good move, and so on. And I really have the feeling that we are building a livable city. So thank you very much for that. I only have one question is, when can we have more car-free days?
We take both questions or one-on-one? No, so we have 1 car-free day in Brussels. It takes the whole of the region. It's the best day of the year to come to Brussels. Every day is good to come to Brussels, but this is really the best day. And Brussels is crowded. It's always good weather, something we can fix. So it's a wonderful day. And so I think we should do it every month. So I put a proposal on the table saying, let's do this every month. It's good. People are happy. People are really happy on this day. People suddenly discover their bikes in the basement, make it fixed, and are using it the week after. So it is something wonderful. But so far in politics, you need to have a majority. And I don't have a majority yet, and so far they're saying no. But that's the good thing about elections coming up. There's stress about it. That's not a good thing. I need to be re-elected to continue. But it's one of the things we'll put in place. It's okay, if we don't have the public support now, let's show it that there's a public support for it. Because as you live in Brussels, you know, there's a lot of backlash going on. There's a lot of critics, and it's very loud. And I'm truly convinced that there's a silent majority asking to go faster, to go more ambitious, and to go stronger. And I hope next election can show so. We'll see.
How do you handle the critics?
Sorry?
How do you handle the critics?
You have different kind of critics. You have people saying it's not fast enough, it's not going at the speed we want to, and these are critics that touch me because I agree. Mm-hmm. And you have critics saying it's too radical, it's too much, but since I really, really don't agree, I really think there's a lot of potential in my city. I love my city, but I see the potential. I see cities all around the world changing. I think that's what we need to do. So I'm really convinced to go there. And you have to listen to critics. I think there's always a reality in it because you cannot, like we said before, you cannot give people the feeling that they're left behind. So if people are, and that's what's happening in Brussels for the moment, people are crying, we're feeling left behind, this is against us, it's gentrification, you're chasing us away. These are emotions that you need to take serious and you need to work on. So this is something that we're trying to listen to, trying to work on. But on the other hand, I have no choice. I've been elected with a program on road security, air quality, quality of life. So that's why I was elected. So that's what I'm implementing. And I think if every politician should start by doing what they promised, I think the confidence of people in politics would increase.
We have two questions in the front row. We'll take them. We'll take the two of them. There was also... We'll take both. So.
Okay. Elke. Hello. Thank you for a wonderful, very insightful, and very motivating speech. I would like to know more about. So you're Minister of Mobility, and tell us more about your ministry and how is it related to Ministry of Transport. I'm from the UK. And I would love to know more about, like, so is that like Ministry of Cycling as well? What was the motivation to start this ministry? When did it start? And just tell us more, because it will be interesting to know exactly what you do as a ministry and how is it related to Ministry of Transport. And yeah, thank you.
And we'll take the other question here.
Yes. Is it working? Yeah. Ingrid de Bruin from the Transport Authority of Amsterdam, and I really believe in how to design your city with for a more livable situation. But here in the city of Amsterdam, the municipality is introducing also 30 kilometers an hour in next December. And as authority, we are struggling a bit with our operators and the municipality, how to organize, how to design, because we see the timetable, we will not reach the real times we want, so we have to lower the frequency. What is your advice to the municipality, to our operators, to us as authority, how to deal with that?
Okay, two good questions. I'll start with the last one, because the freshest in my head. First of all is to continue. When we implemented it, we had, it was during COVID, it was the first, and it wasn't, we decided it would start the 1st of January 21. And so it was a question, do we continue, don't we continue? How do we do it? A lot of questions on, should we do it the whole of the region or start neighborhood by neighborhood? Do we go from 50 to 40 to 30? So all these questions came. And we went to look at Grenoble and Helsinki, who are the two cities who inspired us to do so. And in Helsinki, they said, just go for it. What we've done is we've worked neighborhood by neighborhood, went from 50 to 30, and we first adapted infrastructure, make sure that everything was ready, and then we reduced. But you lose a lot of time by doing so, and reducing the speed limit, even if your infrastructure is not ready, even if not everything is perfect, it has a positive impact, and that's something I can confirm now. So we followed the speed driven in Brussels, and on all the roads, also those who stayed at 50, we saw a reduction of 10 to 20%. So people are driving slower. I'm not saying there's not speeding anymore. People living in Brussels can confirm there's still some rodeo driving and crazy speeding, but in general, speed has reduced. So I think that's important. We did put 1 year to prepare it, and it was a very intensive year. So we went to, it was on a map, and so we have 19 communes, local authorities. So with each local authority, each street was considered, is this 30, is this 50? We went together with the public transport saying, okay, what does it mean and how do we organize it? So we had a lot of time in preparing this really street by street, making sure that every street was considered in a separate way. And then we just implemented it. It's been a long road to organize it, but the most important message was just go for it. And it was the most important message they gave me. It's a difficult moment, but it will pay off afterwards. Then the question about what do you do? So I'm the Minister of Mobility, Public Works and Road Security, which means that I'm responsible for public transport. So the public transport company of Brussels is under my authority. I'm responsible for public works, which means on all of the streets and all the public space. If you want to rearrange, it is on my authority. Just one side note, there's only about 15% of the public space in hands of the region. So the minister are from the region and the others are on the local level. So it is a shared competence with the local level. Road security, so I have different competences in my package. And I think that's been crucial. It's 1/4 of the regional budget. So I'm an expensive one in the government. We actually have budget discussions. So it is fighting to have all the budgets you need. But it's important to have everything, because if we want to change the way people get around in Brussels, you need to offer alternatives. You need to invest in public transport. You need to put in place cycling lanes. You need to put in place those circulation schemes. So all those things need to go hand in hand. And so that's important. And that's the advantage we have. Belgium is a federal country. So the regions, we have 3 regions in Belgium. Brussels is a region. It's a city and a region. But we have quite a lot of competences. We can do a lot on our own scale, which is an advantage, because it means that we can really pioneer on some things. And the other 2 regions, I think it's typical. Cities are always the first place where change is happening. But we are held back a little bit, but it's mostly in our own hands. And I think that's the advantage there is. And I can complain why it's difficult and everything, but I won't.
Well, thank you very much for a wonderful keynote and all the insights you shared. The next forum, the next edition. As you know, the next edition of the forum shall take place in Brussels, so that will be an occasion for us to experience firsthand the changes you've implemented in the city. And we are lucky to have a second keynote this afternoon looking at cognitive biases. And for this, we've invited Samah Karaki. Samah, you're a neuroscientist. You earned your PhD in neuroscience from the University of Montpellier, and you are now the founder and the head of the Social Brain Institute. And you will tell us about cognitive biases and the impact of social environment in transitioning towards sustainable mobility. Thanks a lot.
So, hello everybody. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but when I was listening to the minister's talk, and you said at some point when citizens had this initiative to go and picnic, so the politics followed because they had to. I was like, yeah. I come from Lebanon, and people went to the streets by thousands to picnic and to say the streets is ours, and then politics never followed. Because it's not about politics following the citizens' initiatives, it's about having the right people in power, which I think you are, if you believe what you told us before. So I'm a neuroscientist, and I know that this is a trend. This discipline is a trend. It's very sexy to talk about neuroscience, neuroarchitecture, neurowisdom, neuro-cooking even. So I like first to acknowledge that we occupy a place that is bigger than we should occupy. We cannot actually consider that we are a discipline that could inform policies. But we can correct what you believe about the brain. That's interesting. So, for example, we can say, no, we don't have, the brain is not lateralized. You are not either intuitive or pragmatic. Intuition is not in the tummy. We can say that. We can also say that we do not use only 10% of our cognitive potential, and that there's actually not much inside. So, you know, like, I know that there are neuroscientists, maybe maybe you are an optimistic neuroscientist, who would work on like liberating human potential so we can make better decisions, right? So I don't, I'm not a part of that group, because I think that there are not much inside individual brains. That's why we need each other, because we are not that fascinating as decision makers. And, you know, like, starting with that assumption, this is where we can get interested in looking at such issue as climate change with different perspectives. And today, I want to maybe deconstruct one of the major misconceptions we have about our brains, is that, like, I don't know if you know about the history of neuroscience. That's also another myth, that we have bumps, and that's, you know, like, this is where our intelligence and intuition and competencies, you know, like, are present or not. Or, you know, you were not supposed to be in power because you know, according to scientists in the past, you're too hysterical to take decisions. So hopefully we'll continue questioning those misconceptions about our nature, but still today you will have very acclaimed scientists pretending that the key barrier for sustainable mobility is human nature. So I am sure you've heard much about that idea that we are not doing much for climate because we are wired in a way that, you know, we need to consume. That's what we are, right? And that we need to tackle our cognitive biases. And I'm sure you heard about cognitive biases. Well, I'm not neither the group of people who's gonna lecture you on cognitive biases, because it's just, you know, like, public information about how we function, but it doesn't change anything to know that we are biased. So it's not gonna be the topic. Because it's true that when we have when we have alternative ways of consuming, of producing, of imagining cities, we are faced with our resistance to change, right? So this is why, if there are smokers amongst us, you know that you should not be smoking, right? It's not a secret anymore. You know that you should exercise more. You know, we know much of what we should be doing, but we resist change for a very efficient reason. It's that we are actually busy. You know, we are busy. We have huge cognitive load. We have so many things going in our brain at the same time. So it's efficient not to choose change. I mean, like, this is maybe also smart from evolutionary point of view to keep doing the things the way we do them, right? I mean, if this is human nature, why not? You know, because if I am choosing every word I'm telling you right now, I will be very slow, and I think I'll also make more mistakes, right? So I'm just using automatism. So this is a part of our brain that we are very proud of as humans, because as a species we have the biggest prefrontal cortex. And this part of our brain is the one that make you able to listen to me. You can also be doing something more sophisticated, is to pretend to listen to me, right? While doing something else. So this is the part of the brain that allow you to do this. And this part of the brain is also able to delay gratification, you know? It's that for me to say, I'm hungry, I didn't have lunch, which is true, but I delayed this gratification, instead of accepting the banana right now, because I would say, like, there's no time to digest it. So I delayed this gratification because your cat would not do that, right? So because we have this prefrontal cortex that allow us to say, I'm not going to consume this even if it brings me pleasure, because I want future generations to enjoy this planet, right? Yeah, this is what this is supposed to be, to make us able to do, is to anticipate the future and to calculate the costs and benefits of our behaviors in a way that, make us take ethical decisions, right? Which also your cat would not do that. So this is a picture that I show almost in all my conferences because I'm very fan of it. This is a small part of a human cell, like two-dimensional. So imagine this three-dimensional and and you have millions of that. And these are doing amazing physiological automatisms right now, so that like you're alive, right? So what's interesting about our brains is that the same way we have all those automatisms, this is also how we learn language. This is also how I walk. I have my stereotypes. I have my norms. This is where culture is present in the same place where you actually breathe and digest food. So this is why we are, like our habits are so ingrained in us, because doing whatever you do as a habit is like breathing. So it's not important that you know things about things, because if somebody tells me now breathing is not a very good idea, and proves it to me, so I could stop breathing for a few seconds, right? And then the automatism would be stronger, because this is where I'd have no entry. I cannot kill myself by stopping to breathe, right? This is where your brain is not giving you any free will to decide about your actions. So just to make you realize, this is a brain cell that is learning something new. This is actually the automatism, a live video, a live footage of brain learning something new. So you see that you're building more connections, right? And something that started very thin, now you have a very sophisticated axonal connections. And this makes the information very fast, intuitive, efficient. So I'm showing you your habits. This is why when you go home, you automatically put your hand, architects, this is what you think of when you're building a space, is like, how can I make those automatisms the most pleasant so that people feel less cognitive load? This is smart architecture. So, thank you. I don't know if you've seen that. It's very used in cognitive biases courses. So you see that square A doesn't have the same tone as square B, right? Okay, so maybe you guessed that it's wrong. They do have the same tone. But the reason why you see them, you can show them. I'm not manipulating you. So you can go back and forth. Just so why are you seeing them having different tones? It's because your brain learned that on a chessboard, like this is how it goes, and then in shadow, you need to make things look lighter. So you can watch this 1,000 times. Your brain would be, I know, but trust me. I've seen thousands of chessboards, and I know what I'm talking about. So knowing has no use in behavioral change. raising awareness, you can't stop spending money on it and time, because people now know. I mean, I was looking at surveys. In 2013, 67% of Americans, of United States people, were not sure about climate change. It's huge, But today, it's 87% that all agree that, yeah, the climate change exists and that it's caused by human intervention. So it's not about knowledge. It has never been about knowledge. It is about systems and whether politics actually design environments that make people less responsible of shifting their behaviors for the same reasons that are stated, is that we're busy as individuals and that we cannot transform all our beautiful intentions into changes in the social environment. So this is how it looks for us when we have to change our behavior. It looks like a hassle, because there's a way, we call it la voie de moindre résistance. So like it's like our brains resist less to something that we are used to. So what do politics do? They make this right road seem easy. So this is one strategy. The second one is to make the road on the left filled with hassles. That's it. Thank you. And this is how you actually can design any change intervention for your individual life. You complicate the access to what you want to stop, and you make everything that you want to adopt easy to access. So key drivers of mobility choices are structural barriers first. And when it comes to mobility, instead of talking about individual psychological reasons, we should be able to answer these questions. About public transit infrastructure, is it accessible, convenient, high quality, reliable, clean? About land use policies, how far people live from employment or schools, and what types of areas do they live in? About type of employment. Remember during the COVID crisis, everybody said, it's amazing, now people will shift to teletravail. But, is teleworking amenable? And then other transport alternatives. Are walking and cycling paths inclusive, safe, well-connected? Are there supportive workplace installations like showers and bike racks? So these changes, the structural barriers, that if they're not addressed, there's no need to invite me to talk about cognitive barriers. If people live in cities or in places where they don't feel safe to walk, there's no reason to address their psychology. It's not about psychology, it is about social and political environment and conditions. So then when it comes to, if all those means, if I can, then I can cross to the motivational level. And then we can talk about those cognitive barriers. So this is one that is often suggested as one of the major barriers, is that we have the tendency to overweight short-term costs and benefits over long-term ones. So it's called temporal distancing or hyperbolic discounting. I will give the strategies to counteract those cognitive biases after. I'm going to just cite some of them. So we have this availability bias, which make us more prone to identify immediate top-of-mind examples when evaluating a specific topic, concept, or decision. So this is very present in what media choose to cover. So if there's a terrorist attack and it's covered for weeks and weeks, you end up believing that it's happening way more often than car accidents or gun incidents. That's typically what happens in the States. Then you have the sunk cost fallacy. You all know, you all experience this when you are in the movies and you paid for your place and then the movie sucks, but you stay because you've paid. So that's because whenever you invested time, energy in something, your brain values this thing more than it should. It's also, you know, works for your relationships. Sometimes you just say, like, it's been 15 years with friends or lovers, so you believe that you should not just stop this relationship because you invested so much time and energy. So we're gonna see how we can leverage those cognitive biases to address cognitive barriers. And then we have optimism. And optimism is something that could lead some of us to believe that there would be technological solutions, and that will be green entrepreneurs that are geniuses, and that will come up with amazing solutions, and that they will become trillionaires, right? Because this is how we can motivate them to go into green technology, which is actually not true, because it's, again, the problem is having trillionaires, you know, having very bad lifestyles for the planet, right? So it's a bit paradoxical. But also because it, you know, keeping on promoting this type of ambition make the real process of inventing whatever innovation individual instead of being collective, depending on the infrastructure, depending on people working, you know, like as militants, as activists. So we cannot address climate change without addressing our definition of what is success and of definition of what is social justice. Okay, so how can we leverage those cognitive biases I talked about? So how can we make sustainable mobility options highly salient so that we leverage this availability bias? So it's about reducing people's uncertainty around transit. So it goes, I don't know if you mentioned those strategies before I arrive, but it goes with creating digital salience for public transport that people already use. So information such as vehicle arrival times. Like before coming here, I spent 1.5 hours at the train station in Paris, having non-reliable information whether I'm going to be with you or not. Though this uncertainty is experienced in the brain as pain. And why would you go back to that pain again, right? So we need to work on this trust, on the trust level, when we communicate about public transport difficulties, because this is also part of what makes it attractive to us. We need also to reduce the cognitive load. So the cognitive load, we have so few attentional and decisional resources in our brains. So the less choices we make, the better we are. So we need to provide personalized travel plans at traditional moments. So when people change jobs or change districts, when kids start their schools, one strategy would be to give them the option so they don't have to look for them. The options of them using transport, public transport. Then we can increase the ease of using public transit. So too many strategies have been tested before. So to transition to contactless payments. So like maybe it looks a bit irrelevant, But when we let people choose between using their phones to validate their subscription compared to having another card, we see that having an additional card adds hassle. So the idea is to invite people to change nothing from their habits, to make it really implicit, so they don't have to add an additional choice and to engage more cognitive load. So at the same time, we increase the pain of paying for those that use their private cars. So increasing the pain, meaning that we make this recurrent payment impossible. Because, so this is something that has been studied in Indonesia and in the States. Lump sum, when we have a lump sum in advance, when we have subscription, the brain calculates it as less costly than when you have to consume at the same time that you're paying for the service. So that's why we need to increase access to subscriptions that are not too complicated to do. Like in Paris, you have to go physically to, and stand in the line to get a subscription. So it has to be done easily and to complicate subscriptions for those who use their private cars. Keeping in mind that those applications should not be applied to everyone. They should have also a social justice perspective regarding people that do not have the choice of using their personal and private car. In the UK in 2016, I don't know if you know about the sugar tax. So it was, at the beginning, it was the government trying to do a public health reform, putting tax on beverages that have high sugar, and like asking consumers to pay a little more if you're buying a very sweet beverage. But then there's a team called Behavioral Insights team that actually use cognitive science to inform policies. And they say it will not change people's behavior to do this. What could be more efficient is to put that tax on manufacturers so that they have to pay more when they put more sugar in their beverages. So consumers keep paying the same price. They don't change nothing. They don't change anything about their behaviors, but they are drinking less sweet beverages. So the same technique could be used when we transform buses into electrifying buses. So citizens, individuals are not changing their habits, but still their commuting-related emissions are lowered. And lastly, I want to talk about this need that we have, which is our relatedness and social connectedness. So this is an experiment just to show you that when humans are playing a digital game, that they're throwing balls in an electronic game, and the computer isolates the player. So what we see is an activation in the center of the brain that is also activated when you have physical pain. So being excluded is as painful as being physically hurt. And when we give the equivalent paracetamol, a painkiller, this pain is reduced. So this is how serious for us to belong. This is how painful for us to feel excluded. So we are conformist beings, we are social beings, and this means that we can also work on creating, on making the social norm of using public transport the most shared, the most salient, the most visible. So this is when you reduce the pain by giving a painkiller, and this is just a pain. Yeah, can. So yes, we need to to work on this, what we call pluralistic ignorance, is to consider that it's not to know actually about the norm and to make it visible. So to talk about good behaviors and to make them salient, to make them more visible, to invite media and influencers to also carry those uses. Thank you. And just I want to get back to this image. I'm sure you didn't change your mind about, because again, any reform that would target our consumption behaviors or our transport behavior or mobility behaviors should be behaviorally, socially informed, and we should rely less on raising awareness. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samah, and I think we will be puzzled by this chessboard for quite a few more hours, certainly until way into the night. We have time for, I think, a couple of questions, if you agree. Yes, there is one question there, and maybe we'll start with this one. Yes, the mic is on its way.
Thank you very much. My name is Jan van Sem. I'm director of the Partnership of Public Transport Authorities. And my question is, if we don't like to be isolated, can we use this for getting people out of their own car?
If we succeed to make the use of a private car, driving alone, to look like an obsolete thing to do. You look like maybe we will get to a point where we would say 30, 50 years ago, people used to take the car and drive and they're just alone by themselves, which is very weird. You know, like it should become just like putting a seatbelt. You know, this is how norms change. And sometimes people say, oh, you know, this is how we are. And so like, no, because cultures change. You know, like so many norms changed in the last 50 years. You know, before 75, women couldn't go to HEC, right? So because we believe that they cannot actually carry serious jobs. So this is only 50 years ago.
Not to say that HEC graduates do serious jobs.
Yeah. So we can be disruptive radical about what we imagine as norms, and I would call it realistic, not dreamy, because we should not be allowed to drive a car alone if there are reliable, trustworthy, clean, and affordable public transport. Yeah, but we should work on those structural changes first.
Thank you. Do we have another question, maybe? Well, if there are no other questions, thanks a lot, Samah.
Thank you.
And I think indeed these cognitive biases are often one of the blind spots in the decarbonization, not just for transport, but overall, and we should definitely pay more attention to this. It is now the time to conclude this afternoon, and I would like to offer some words of conclusion, even though it is, of course, a challenging exercise, because so much has been said in the course of the afternoon that I cannot possibly do justice to all of the insights that have been shared with us. But one of the things that has always struck me is how a city is embodied, incarnated by its transport, and even, I would say, by its transportation plan. A long time ago, I used to live in London. And there were many things that I liked about London, but one of the things that I really disliked about London was the tube. Because it would take forever to get into the tube, because the tunnels were so deep, because there were many strikes, because there were many problems, and because you couldn't get any network coverage when you were on the tube, which means that if you were late, you couldn't tell the people that you would be late. And I had to use the tube every single day because, of course, I was a poor student and therefore I used to live in the suburbs. And I really hated the tube. And then, while I was there, Transport for London, which is the transportation authority for the city, had the idea of promoting the tube through souvenirs. And all of a sudden, we would see T-shirts and mugs and tote bags and umbrellas with the map of the tube on them. And that was driving me crazy. The thing that I hated the most about the city had become the emblem of the city that they were selling on T-shirts and mugs and umbrellas to tourists. And for them, the souvenir of London had become the tube map. And later on, I moved to Paris. And amongst the reasons that made me move from London to Paris was, of course, the woman I loved, but also my hatred for the London tube. And to this day, I keep in mind about how, for many people, a city is embodied by its transport and how much transportation shapes a city. And therefore, today, I was struck by how much the decarbonization of mobility is actually about much more than decarbonization. This is also about redesigning cities. And in redesigning cities, we also redesign the way we live, the way we exchange, the way we relate to each other, and the way we constitute a political community. And that is fundamental, because one of the key challenges of decarbonization is about climate physics and cognitive science, and how one doesn't match the other. One of the key aspects of climate physics is that the impacts of climate change that will be felt tomorrow in Amsterdam have nothing to do with the greenhouse gas emissions that will be produced today in Amsterdam. Because obviously the climate doesn't care whether the emissions come from Amsterdam, Paris, Lima, Canberra, or Bangkok. And because we know that we have a strong inertia in the climate system, and that climate change is a problem of stock and not of flow, and that the problem comes from the accumulation of greenhouse gas over the past centuries, which is the reason why many of the youth today feel some resentment towards their elders, because they realize that they will suffer from impacts of climate change that have nothing to do with their own emission, but everything to do with the emissions of their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. And therefore, because of that, because of this disconnection in time and space between our actions and the effects of our actions, we do not have the possibility to experience concretely the results of our actions. And that is a key cognitive difficulty. Every year, I tell my students that it is actually in their best interest to study and not to cheat at exams. I tell them, you know, if you cheat at exams, you might have a short-term gain, but in the long run, that will become a handicap, and there will be gaps in your knowledge of the matter. And therefore, do not cheat. You shouldn't cheat at exams. I tell them that every year. But every year, I also have someone to watch the exam. Because I know that even though I've told them that it was not in their best long-term interest, there will still be the temptation to cheat if they do not have the possibility to experience concretely the consequence of their cheating. And this is the reason why we have so much insisted in the past on the co-benefits of climate action. We've told people, well, you know, if you eat less meat, you will be able to have a more healthy diet and to reduce the risk of some diseases associated with a diet that would be too heavy on meat. We tell them, well, you should bike instead of taking your car for short journeys, because if you bike, you'll be able to do some exercise and enjoy some fresh air. We've insisted a lot on the co-benefits of climate action because clearly we couldn't count on reducing one's carbon footprint as the main driver of behavioral change. And that is important. But something that struck me today was that the co-benefits of decarbonizing mobility in cities were so huge when it came to building more livable cities that actually maybe we should think things the other way around, and that maybe we shouldn't think about the co-benefits of decarbonization, but we should think of decarbonization as the co-benefit of building more livable cities. And I think that can be a fundamental shift if decarbonization is no longer the goal, but rather the co-benefit of our actions in redesigning transport and therefore in redesigning cities and the way we relate to each other. And I think this is exactly the reason why the mobility sphere can achieve much more than what it was designed for. I mean, our key goal in setting up this think tank was obviously to work on the decarbonization of transport and of mobility. But by doing so, we can redesign cities and therefore the way we relate to each other and the way we live. And I think that is a fantastic endeavor that we can undertake. And I think that our challenge now, in order to conceive and implement this political project, is a challenge of gathering people together. And very often, when we discuss the decarbonization of mobility, we have a tendency to oppose people to each other, to oppose people living in the urban centers with people living in the urban regions, a tendency to oppose motorists with users of public transport, a tendency to oppose users of some public transport with users of other public transport, as if they were competing with each other. I think that we need to recognize that all of us use different means of public transportation, and yet very often oppose these means of public transportation. I use public transport, but I also have a driving license. Similarly, I think that a bias that we have sometimes is to oppose urban areas with rural regions. And very often, I think what creates some resentment about people living in peri-urban or rural regions is that they have the impression that all of the effort and investments are concentrated in cities and that they are being left over and excluded from decarbonization as a political project. And I think that's one of the key takeaways also, is that cities are no islands, and that we should think about the connections between people who live in cities and people who use cities or people who travel to cities. And I think it's extremely important in the way we design new mobility schemes. We should also make sure to gather Western Europe with Central and Eastern Europe. And we've learned about some cultural biases in the way we see cars, in the way we use cars in particular, which are extremely important. This will not work if people have the impression of being excluded, and if people have the impression that this is a plan designed by some for the same. And I think the challenge of this think tank, the mobility sphere, is to try and avoid that, and precisely to have a very comprehensive view of these issues to make sure that the ideas we discuss can tomorrow become real plans. And I'm really hoping that in the future, and also thanks to the workshops that we will organize, that we can actually design some experimental plans that we can test in cities. And I think that testing with users is an extremely important, and that was also a question from the audience. There are many, many other topics that needs to be approached in the coming month. I'm thinking about adaptation of transport infrastructure to the impacts of climate change. I'm thinking about equity, not just as a kind of grand general moral principle, but also as a condition for efficiency, and many, many more. This is the reason why I'm really super optimistic and enthusiastic about the future of the mobility sphere, because I think that what we have planted today in terms of seeds and in terms of the way we can redesign the future of cities and build more livable cities by decarbonizing the transportation sector, I think is something that will take us really, really, really very far. So I want to thank all of you for your participation today, especially, of course, the panelists, the speakers, but also all of the audience members. I hope that this afternoon was worth of your time. I hope that you will also help us and contribute and make the think tank known and visible in your respective networks. I, of course, want to thank all of you who helped organize this event. Of course, Transdev, the Institute Choiseul as well, Ise, Pierre, and many others who didn't count their hours and their energy to organize this. And I think it is now time to close the event, and I think that there are some drinks waiting for us outside. So thanks a lot to all of you, and until next time in Brussels.
La mobilité, c'est quelque chose qui est lié à nos besoins quotidiens.
But it comes at a cost, the cost of increasing greenhouse gas emissions.
The climate crisis is a code red for humanity.
Aujourd'hui, notre modèle urbain est périmé et il y a donc une forte nécessité de changer de paradigme.
On ne peut pas restreindre le besoin de mobilité parce que c'est finalement un besoin de contact.
Il faut qu'on puisse être subversif sur les questions de changement.
On doit permettre aux gens de continuer de se déplacer avec des solutions qui sont adaptées à chaque territoire.
We can transform what is perceived as a huge constraint into a project for society as a whole.
En fait, il vaut mieux qu'on regarde ces problématiques d'une manière multidisciplinaire, en impliquant tous les acteurs et actrices.
L'objectif, c'est d'avoir un think tank qui va parler maintenant des solutions pour s'assurer qu'effectivement cette transition, elle embarque bien tout le monde.